Did you know 5 movie franchises quietly built the foundation for the entire film industry we know today? Their influence goes beyond the screen, into theme parks, streaming, and even how stories are told. If you love movies, you owe it to yourself to know how this all began. Because once you see the pattern, you'll never unsee it. In this video, we'll explore how Star Wars, Harry Potter, The Lord of the Rings, James Bond, and the Marvel Cinematic Universe changed cinema forever. From redefining special effects and storytelling to creating massive global fandoms and billion-dollar worlds, these franchises didn't just dominate box offices, they reshaped culture itself. You'll see how each one sparked a new era of filmmaking, business, and imagination, revealing the blueprint that modern Hollywood still follows today. Chapter 1: The Age of Wonder begins. The lights dimmed in theaters across America on May 25, 1977. Audiences settled into their seats, popcorn in hand, expecting another summer movie. What they got instead was a revolution. A long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. Those 10 words, glowing in blue against an infinite star field, changed everything. But this story doesn't begin in 1977. And it certainly doesn't end there. Close your eyes for a moment and think, can you hum the Star Wars theme? Picture Harry Potter's lightning bolt scar? Visualize Iron Man's arc reactor glowing through his chest? Feel the weight of the One Ring? Hear James Bond introduce himself, Bond, James Bond? Close your eyes for a moment and think, can you hum the Star Wars theme? Picture Harry Potter's lightning bolt scar? Visualize Iron Man's arc reactor glowing through his chest? Feel the weight of the One Ring? Hear James Bond introduce himself, Bond, James Bond? If you answered yes to even one of these questions, you're part of the largest shared cultural experience in human history. These 5 franchises: Star Wars, Harry Potter, The Lord of the Rings, James Bond, and the Marvel Cinematic Universe, have collectively earned over $50 billion at the global box office. They've spawned theme parks on 3 continents, inspired millions of cosplayers, and given us a common language of heroes and villains, magic and science, hope and sacrifice. But here's what makes them truly extraordinary: they've done something Hollywood said was impossible. They've made audiences care, deeply, passionately, generationally, about stories that span decades, sometimes centuries, of fictional history. To understand how we got here, we need to look at what cinema was like before these titans arrived. There's a moment in film history that divides that before from the after. Before, movies were standalone experiences. You watched them, enjoyed them, and moved on. Sequels existed, sure, but they were usually cheap cash grabs, diminishing returns on an original idea. The notion that you could build an interconnected universe of stories, with threads weaving through multiple films over multiple years, with characters growing and evolving and surprising you, that was the stuff of comic books and novels. Not cinema. After, everything you see in multiplexes today. Teasers in end credits. Interconnected storylines. Phases and sagas. Films that require you to have watched 3 other films to fully understand them. Billion-dollar opening weekends. Fans theorizing online about plot threads that won't resolve for 5 years. The 5 franchises in this book are the architects of that laughter. They didn't just make successful movies, they rewrote the rules of what movies could be and what audiences would invest in. Which raises the obvious question: what actually makes a franchise work? Why do some become cultural phenomena while others fade into obscurity after a single sequel? It's not special effects, plenty of expensive spectacles bomb every year. It's not star power. A-list actors can't save a bad story. It's not even the source material. For every successful adaptation, there are dozens that fizzle. The answer, as we'll discover through these pages, is deceptively simple: these franchises taught us something. Not in a preachy, after-school special way, but in the way that great myths have always taught humanity, through heroes facing impossible odds, through Dark Lords and Chosen Ones, through the small triumphs of courage in the face of overwhelming darkness. Star Wars taught an entire generation that hope matters, even when the Empire seems invincible. Harry Potter showed millions of children that friendship and love are more powerful than dark magic. The Lord of the Rings reminded us that even the smallest person can change the course of history. James Bond evolved over 6 decades to reflect our changing values about heroism, duty, and what it means to serve. And the Marvel Cinematic Universe demonstrated that flawed, human heroes grappling with real consequences could be just as compelling as invincible demigods. These aren't just movies. They're modern mythology. And like all great myths, they've shaped the way we see ourselves and our world. The journey we're about to take together will reveal how each of these franchises came to be, and more importantly, why they matter. Let me give you a glimpse of what lies ahead. How a scrappy independent filmmaker nearly went bankrupt making a space opera that studio executives thought would fail, and instead birthed the most influential franchise in film history. Why a British author's story about a boy wizard resonated so deeply that it created a generation of readers and spawned a multi-billion-dollar empire that refuses to fade. How a linguistics professor's dense, 1,000-page fantasy novel became an unfilmable trilogy that won 17 Academy Awards and revolutionized digital effects. The secret to 007's longevity. How a franchise that began in the Cold War has survived and thrived for over 60 years by constantly reinventing itself while staying true to its core. How Marvel Studios took B-list comic book characters nobody cared about and crafted the highest-grossing franchise of all time through unprecedented narrative ambition. But more importantly, you'll understand why these stories matter. Why millions of people waited in line at midnight for the next installment. Why grown adults weep at fictional characters' deaths. Why these franchises have become the campfire stories of the modern age, the tales we gather around, share with our children, and pass down as part of our cultural inheritance. Think back, if you will, to your own first encounter with one of these worlds. Maybe you were young, maybe you were already an adult. But something about that first experience stuck with you in a way that other movies didn't. You don't know it yet, but your life is about to change. Not dramatically, you'll still go to work tomorrow, still pay your bills, still live your normal life. But somewhere in your imagination, a seed is being planted. A story is taking root. And decades from now, you'll still remember exactly where you were when you first experienced it. That's the power of a great franchise. It doesn't just entertain you for 2 hours. It becomes part of who you are. So silence your phone. Get comfortable. The journey we're about to take spans 5 franchises, hundreds of characters, and over a century of combined storytelling. We'll explore how these cinematic legends were born, how they grew, how they stumbled, and how they taught us lessons about courage, friendship, sacrifice, and hope that transcended the silver screen. The lights are dimming. The curtain is rising. And somewhere, in a galaxy far, far away, or perhaps in a cupboard under the stairs, or in the Shire, or in Her Majesty's Secret Service, or in a cave with a box of scraps, a hero is about to begin an impossible journey. Let's begin ours. Chapter 2, A New Hope, the Star Wars Phenomenon. In the summer of 1973, a young filmmaker named George Lucas sat down to write something impossible. He'd just finished American Graffiti, a modest coming-of-age film about teenagers cruising around California in the early 1960s. The movie was still making its way through post-production, but Lucas already knew his next project. He wanted to make a space opera, a Flash Gordon adventure for a new generation. What he didn't know was that he was about to embark on the most improbable journey in cinema history. A journey that would nearly destroy him, bankrupt him, and ultimately transform him into one of the wealthiest and most influential filmmakers of all time. The odds were spectacularly against him. Science fiction was dead in Hollywood. Space adventures were considered box office poison. And the script Lucas was writing was, by his own later admission, a mess. But George Lucas had an advantage that nobody, including Lucas himself, fully understood yet. He was tapping into something ancient, something that had resonated with human beings for thousands of years. He was crafting a modern myth. The path from that first draft to the theater screen on May 25, 1977, is a story of desperation, innovation, and the kind of blind faith that borders on insanity. It's also the blueprint for how every major franchise in this book would eventually operate. Lucas didn't just make a successful movie. He invented an entirely new way of thinking about what movies could be. Let's go back to where it started. Lucas had become fascinated with the old Flash Gordon serials he'd watched as a kid, those weekly adventures where the hero would face impossible odds, only to be saved at the last second before the credits rolled. He approached the rights holders to remake Flash Gordon, but they wanted too much money. So Lucas decided to create his own universe instead. After graduating from the University of Southern California in 1967, Lucas had already made one science fiction film, Thanks 1138, which was critically praised but commercially failed. That failure made studios nervous. When Lucas pitched his space opera idea, United Artists and Universal Pictures both rejected it. Finally, 20th Century Fox executive Alan Ladd Jr. took a chance on the ambitious project. The deal Fox offered wasn't exactly generous. Star Wars began production with a budget of $8 million, which eventually reached $11 million, a modest sum even for 1976. But there was a clause in the contract that would change everything. Lucas negotiated to waive a $500,000 directing fee in exchange for sequel and merchandising rights. At the time, Fox executives thought they were getting a great deal. Merchandising was just toys and lunch boxes, right? How much could that possibly be worth? The answer, as it turned out, was billions. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Writing the script was torture. Lucas went through draft after draft, completely restructuring the story between versions. The second draft, completed in 1975, finally started to resemble what Star Wars would eventually become. But even then, the script was unwieldy and the dialogue felt wooden. Lucas hired screenwriting friends Willard Huyck and Gloria Katz to punch up the scenes between Han Solo and Princess Leia, though Lucas reportedly rewrote their revisions. What transformed Lucas's struggling script into something special wasn't just rewrites, it was his discovery of mythologist Joseph Campbell's book The Hero with a Thousand Faces. Campbell's 1949 work explored the theory that mythological narratives across cultures frequently share a fundamental structure, which Campbell called the monomyth, or hero's journey. The hero's journey follows a pattern. The hero must answer or reject the call to adventure, receive help from a supernatural helper, undergo a series of trials, face a great ordeal, receive a reward, and finally return transformed. Lucas realized his story naturally followed this pattern. Luke Skywalker was the archetypal hero. Obi-Wan Kenobi was the wise mentor. The Death Star was the dragon to be slain. This wasn't just clever structure, it was tapping into something primal. Campbell argued that myths address universal human experiences such as the search for identity, the struggle between good and evil, and the quest for meaning. By consciously shaping his space adventure around these ancient patterns, Lucas was creating something that would feel both brand new and somehow familiar, like a story you'd known your whole life. The actual filming of Star Wars was a nightmare. Principal photography began in March 1976 in Tunisia and at Elstree Studios in England, and the production went $3 million over budget due to delays. The cast and crew thought the whole thing was ridiculous. The dialogue felt silly when spoken out loud. The costumes looked absurd. And Lucas, never comfortable directing actors, struggled to communicate his vision. Lucas was constantly behind schedule, studio executives flew to London trying to pull the plug, and Lucas suffered panic attacks and was hospitalized for hypertension during post-production. When he showed early cuts to filmmaker friends including Brian De Palma, they were confused and skeptical. Only Steven Spielberg, Lucas's closest friend, believed the film would work. Part of the problem was that Lucas needed visual effects that didn't exist yet. When he discovered that 20th Century Fox's in-house effects department was no longer operational, Lucas founded Industrial Light and Magic in 1975, hiring a small team of college students, artists, and engineers and setting them up in a warehouse in Van Nuys, California. These young innovators essentially invented modern visual effects on the fly, creating motion control cameras and new compositing systems that would become industry standard. The music almost didn't happen either. Lucas initially planned to use pre-existing orchestral music rather than an original score, but composer John Williams convinced him that original music would be preferable. Williams then created one of the most iconic film scores in history, themes so memorable that you can probably hum them right now, decades later. Star Wars was completed less than a week before its May 25, 1977 release date, with Lucas describing the work as not so much finished as abandoned. Lucas himself was so exhausted and uncertain about the film's prospects that he went on vacation to Hawaii with Spielberg rather than attend the premiere. While they were building sandcastles on the beach, history was being made in theaters across America. The film opened in just 32 theaters. Fox didn't have much faith in it. Few were confident in the film's box office prospects, but it was released in a small number of theaters and quickly became a surprise blockbuster hit, leading to a much wider release. The film earned $1.5 million through its opening weekend, and within 6 months, Star Wars had replaced Jaws as the highest-grossing film, pulling in $220 million during its theatrical run. The response was unprecedented. People saw it multiple times. They lined up around city blocks. They memorized the dialogue. Something about this space fantasy had captured the imagination of an entire generation. 20th Century Fox stock jumped from $6 per share in June 1976 to nearly $27 after the release, and the company's revenue climbed from $195 million in 1976 to $301 million in 1977. But the real genius of Lucas's deal was about to become apparent. That merchandising clause he'd negotiated? Lucas waived a portion of his directing salary in exchange for 40% of merchandising rights, a decision that would eventually make him worth $3.6 billion. The cultural impact was immediate and overwhelming. Phrases like "May the Force be with you," "Evil Empire," and "I am your father" became part of everyday language. Characters like Darth Vader, Luke Skywalker, Princess Leia, Han Solo, and the droid C-3PO and R2-D2 became instantly recognizable around the world. But Star Wars did more than create memorable characters and quotable lines. It fundamentally changed how Hollywood worked. Along with Jaws, Star Wars started the tradition of the summer blockbuster, where films open on many screens simultaneously and profitable franchises became important. It also created the model for the major film trilogy and demonstrated that merchandising rights could generate more money than the film itself. The film's influence on special effects was revolutionary. There was increased investment in special effects across the industry, with companies like Industrial Light and Magic and Digital Productions created to provide them. Science fiction, which had been nearly dead as a genre in the mid-1970s, roared back to life. Following Star Wars' success, Star Trek was greenlit for its first theatrical release in 1979, and even James Bond took a detour to space with Moonraker instead of the originally planned sequel. Most significantly, Star Wars proved that the hero's journey, Campbell's ancient narrative structure, could be a blueprint for blockbuster success. The hero's journey became a tried-and-tested narrative commonly used in mythological stories, and while various literature had followed this template, it was rarely utilized on the big screen until Star Wars popularized it in 1977. Since then, countless films have followed the formula, from The Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter to The Matrix and Guardians of the Galaxy. The original trilogy, Star Wars, later retitled A New Hope, The Empire Strikes Back, 1980, and Return of the Jedi, 1983, would tell a complete story of heroism, redemption, and the triumph of good over evil. Luke's journey from farm boy to Jedi Knight mirrored the classic coming-of-age tale. Darth Vader's revelation as Luke's father and his ultimate redemption explored themes of family, forgiveness, and the possibility of salvation even for those who've committed terrible acts. What made these themes resonate so powerfully? Star Wars embodied universal experiences, identity and destiny through Luke's journey, the conflict between good and evil through the rebellion versus the Empire, and redemption through Luke's efforts to save Vader. These weren't new themes, but Lucas presented them with such visual splendor, emotional sincerity, and mythic weight that they felt fresh and vital. George Lucas's deliberate use of Campbell's theory of the monomyth in making the Star Wars movies is well documented, and Lucas later invited Campbell to Skywalker Ranch to screen the trilogy and discuss its mythic elements. Their conversations revealed something profound. Lucas had created a modern myth that worked precisely because it drew from timeless patterns of storytelling. The lesson Star Wars taught its audience went beyond simple morality tales. It taught us that hope matters, even when facing overwhelming darkness. That small groups of determined individuals can challenge vast empires. That family bonds, even broken ones, can be healed. That power and technology aren't inherently good or evil, it's how we choose to use them that matters. And perhaps most importantly, that even in our darkest moments, redemption is possible. The franchise also taught Hollywood some crucial lessons. Star Wars proved that sequels to successful films were safe bets at the box office, and the cinema-going fanbase would return for more. This led to an explosion of trilogies in the 1980s and beyond. But Lucas taught an even more important lesson: own your intellectual property. Control your vision. Build your infrastructure. Don't rely on studios for what you can do yourself. Lucas founded Lucasfilm in 1971 as his own production company, creating a safe zone where he didn't have to ask for permission or deal with studio interference. This vertical integration, owning production, effects, sound, and distribution, became a model that other filmmakers and studios would eventually follow. When The Phantom Menace arrived in 1999, 16 years after Return of the Jedi, it broke opening day records and became a cultural event. The film earned more than $28 million on opening day and became the fastest film to gross $100 million, accomplishing the feat in just 5 days. The prequels proved that Star Wars could span generations, though they also revealed the challenge of meeting decades of accumulated expectations. In 2012, Lucas made a decision that shocked the entertainment world. He sold Lucasfilm to Disney in a $4 billion deal. The franchise he'd built from nothing, that had made him a billionaire and changed cinema forever, was now in new hands. Some saw it as a betrayal. Others saw it as the natural evolution of a franchise that had always been bigger than any one person. Under Disney's stewardship, Star Wars has expanded in ways Lucas might never have imagined. New trilogies, standalone films, and streaming series like The Mandalorian have kept the franchise alive for new generations. The Disney theme parks have created immersive Star Wars lands where fans can walk through a Star Wars world, pilot the Millennium Falcon, and build their own lightsabers. The franchise has earned over $10 billion at the global box office across all its films. The merchandise has generated tens of billions more. But perhaps the most remarkable achievement is simpler than any dollar amount. Star Wars has remained culturally relevant for nearly 5 decades. Grandparents who saw the original in 1977 now watch The Mandalorian with grandchildren who've grown up with Baby Yoda. That's the power of mythology. Stories that tap into universal truths don't fade, they evolve, they adapt, but they endure. Joseph Campbell recognized this when he watched Lucas's trilogy. Campbell praised Star Wars as a modern myth, noting its ability to inspire awe and convey universal truths. The young filmmaker who sat down in 1973 to write an impossible space opera didn't just create a successful movie franchise. He created a modern fairy tale that would be told and retold, adapted and reimagined, but never forgotten. he proved that audiences were hungry for stories of heroes and villains, of hope and sacrifice, of ancient wisdom dressed in futuristic clothing. Star Wars opened the door for every franchise that would follow. It showed that long-form storytelling across multiple films could work. That merchandising could be an art form unto itself. That visual effects could create entirely new worlds. That mythic storytelling patterns, thousands of years old, still resonated with modern audiences. More than anything, Star Wars taught us that we need these stories. We need to believe that hope can defeat despair, that good can triumph over evil, that ordinary people can become extraordinary when the moment demands it. We need heroes, mentors, and journeys. We need the Force, whatever we choose to call it in our own lives, to guide us through darkness. George Lucas gave us all of that. And in a boardroom somewhere in Hollywood, executives started to realize something. If one filmmaker could create a multi-billion-dollar mythology from scratch, what else was possible? What other stories were waiting to be told? What other franchises could capture the world's imagination? The answer to those questions would unfold over the next few decades, as magic, mythology, and superheroes took their turns reshaping cinema. But it all started with a young farm boy on a desert planet, staring at twin suns and dreaming of adventure. The Force was with us. And it always would be. Chapter 3, The Boy Who Lived, The Wizarding World of Harry Potter. In 1990, a train was delayed. For hours late, from Manchester to London. Most passengers grumbled about the inconvenience, buried themselves in newspapers, or stared blankly out the windows as the English countryside rolled by at an agonizingly slow pace. But for one passenger, a 25-year-old woman named Joanne Rowling, those 4 hours would become the most productive delay in literary history. The idea for Harry Potter came to her fully formed, tumbling into her mind in what she would later describe as the most physical rush of excitement. A scrawny, black-haired, bespectacled boy who didn't know he was a wizard. The images came so vividly, so completely, that she didn't need to write them down. Which was fortunate, because she didn't have a pen. By the time the train finally pulled into King's Cross Station, an entire magical world had taken shape in her imagination. Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Platform 9 3/4. The characters Harry, Ron, and Hermione were already there, fully realized, waiting to begin their adventures. From the start, she knew there would be 7 books, with the whole story plotted out early on. What Rowling didn't know, couldn't have known, was that this idea would become the best-selling book series in history, spawning a multimedia empire worth tens of billions of dollars and fundamentally changing how an entire generation thought about reading, friendship, and courage. But getting there would require surviving heartbreak, poverty, rejection, and the kind of grinding determination that turns dreams into manuscripts. The journey from that delayed train to worldwide phenomenon would take 7 years of struggle before a single book was published. And it would take another decade beyond that to complete the story she'd envisioned on that fateful train ride. Born in Yate, Gloucestershire in 1965, Rowling had always wanted to be a writer. She wrote her first book at age 6, a story about a rabbit, called Rabbit. By 11, she was working on her first novel. But wanting to be a writer and becoming one are two very different things, as Rowling was about to discover. After graduating from university, she took a job as a researcher and bilingual secretary for Amnesty International in London. It was respectable work, but it wasn't writing. When the idea for Harry Potter arrived on that train, Rowling knew immediately that this was the story she'd been waiting to tell. That very evening, she began writing. Then tragedy struck. On December 30, 1990, Rowling's mother died of multiple sclerosis at age 45. Rowling was still working on the first Harry Potter book, and her mother never knew about the wizarding world her daughter was creating. The pain of loss profoundly affected her writing, making the themes of death and Harry's orphanhood far more emotionally resonant than they might have been otherwise. Desperate to escape her grief, Rowling moved to Porto, Portugal, to teach English as a foreign language. She took her manuscript with her, hoping to finish it there. In Portugal, she met and married television journalist Jorge Arends, and in 1993, their daughter Jessica was born. For a brief moment, life seemed to be coming together. But the marriage was troubled and soon ended. Rowling returned to Edinburgh, Scotland, as a single mother with an infant daughter and a suitcase containing the first 3 chapters of Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. She had no job, no money, and an unfinished manuscript that most people would have told her to abandon. Instead, she persevered. In Edinburgh, she trained as a teacher and began teaching in the city's schools, but she continued to write in every spare moment. This often meant writing in cafes while Jessica slept in her stroller, nursing a single cup of coffee for hours because it was warmer than her unheated apartment. She was living on welfare, barely scraping by, but the story wouldn't let her go. The writing process was grueling. It took her 5 years to complete the first book, constantly doubting herself, losing hope and putting it away, only to return to it again and again. She would later say that she kept losing hope, but that happened less and less as she worked on it, as the story began to solidify and take shape. In 1995, she finally completed the manuscript for Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. Exhausted but hopeful, she began the next ordeal, finding someone willing to publish it. The first agent she sent it to returned the manuscript so quickly it seemed like they sent it back the same day it arrived. Rejection after rejection piled up. Publishers couldn't see what Rowling saw. A children's book about a wizard? Too long. Too complex. Not commercial enough. It took a year for her literary agent, Christopher Little, to find a publisher. Lots of them turned it down. Finally, in 1996, a small independent publisher called Bloomsbury saw something in the manuscript. Barry Cunningham, who worked at Bloomsbury at the time, later admitted, "I just sat there in my office and tried to understand the rules of Quidditch. And I thought Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone was a silly title. But I loved the story and the heroism. I liked the friendship between the 3 main characters, the owls, and magic was great." Even then, expectations were low. Bloomsbury's initial print run was only 500 copies, 300 of which were donated to public libraries. Rowling's first royalty check was £600. The book was published under the name J.K. Rowling at the publisher's request. They said it would make the books more appealing to boys. The K stands for Kathleen, her paternal grandmother's name. Then in June 1997, Bloomsbury published Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. The world of children's literature would never be the same. What happened next defied every expectation. The book didn't just sell, it became a phenomenon. Children who rarely read were devouring 300-page novels. Parents were reading along with their kids. Word of mouth spread like wildfire. Rowling's literary agent had warned her, "You do realize, you will never make a fortune out of writing children's books." A year later, she was a millionaire. The book became so popular in the UK that Scholastic paid an unprecedented $105,000 for the American rights to the series. The book was published in the US a year later, in August 1998, with a slightly different title, Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, and at that point, Rowling's life changed forever. But what was it about this story that resonated so deeply? Why did Harry Potter capture imaginations in a way that countless other fantasy novels hadn't? The answer lies partly in Rowling's masterful storytelling, but also in the themes she wove throughout the series. At its core, Harry Potter is about death and the divide between good and evil. But unlike many children's stories that present morality in simple black and white terms, Rowling's wizarding world acknowledged complexity. Good people made mistakes. Bad people had reasons for their choices. Heroes were flawed, and even villains had moments of humanity. The series tackled heavy themes with a deft touch. Prejudice and discrimination ran throughout the story, from the pureblood supremacists who looked down on mudbloods and muggles, to the treatment of house elves and other magical creatures. The books didn't preach, they showed, through the experiences of Hermione, a Muggle-born witch who was brilliant yet constantly had to prove her worth in a society that considered her blood inferior. Friendship formed the emotional backbone of the series. Harry, Ron, and Hermione became one of literature's most beloved trios because their friendship felt real. They fought, they reconciled, they supported each other through impossible challenges. The message was clear: you don't have to face darkness alone. True friends stand with you, even when it's terrifying to do so. The theme of choice versus destiny permeated the narrative. Harry was the chosen one, marked by prophecy to face Voldemort. But Dumbledore's wisdom, repeated throughout the series, made it clear that what mattered wasn't Harry's destiny but his choices. It is our choices, Harry, that show what we truly are, far more than our abilities. This resonated powerfully with young readers facing their own crossroads and decisions. Loss and grief played major roles, informed by Rowling's own experience with her mother's death. Harry was an orphan who never knew his parents. He watched others die throughout the series. The books didn't shy away from death, they confronted it honestly, showing characters grappling with loss and finding ways to carry on. For many young readers facing their own losses, Harry Potter provided a framework for understanding grief. The power of love, not romantic love primarily, but the fierce, sacrificial love of parents for children, friends for each other, became the series' ultimate magic. Harry's mother's love protected him from Voldemort. That same capacity for love would ultimately be his greatest weapon against the Dark Lord's power. It was a message young readers desperately needed: love matters. Compassion matters. These things are not weaknesses, they are strengths. As the books continued, published from 1997 to 2007, the series sold over 600 million copies and was translated into 84 languages. Rowling spent nearly 10 more years writing and publishing the next 6 books, with movies based on the books released between publications. By the time she finished writing the final book in 2007 in the Balmoral Hotel in Edinburgh, she had been living with Harry for 17 years. The books revived fantasy as a viable genre for children's literature and spawned countless imitators. Publishers who had previously rejected fantasy manuscripts suddenly couldn't get enough of them. Reading became cool again for a generation of kids who might otherwise have drifted toward video games and television exclusively. Then came the films. In 1999, Rowling sold the film rights of the first 2 books to Warner Brothers for a reported £1 million. She insisted the principal cast be kept strictly British, though she allowed for Irish actors and foreign actors playing characters of those nationalities. The first film, released in 2001, was followed by 7 more adaptations, concluding with the 8th film, Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 2, in 2011. The movies became massive global events. Midnight premieres drew fans in full costume. The young actors who played Harry, Ron, and Hermione, Daniel Radcliffe, Rupert Grint, and Emma Watson, grew up on screen, their performances maturing along with their characters. The 11 Harry Potter movies have collectively grossed over $9.56 billion worldwide, making it one of the highest-grossing film franchises in history. Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 2 became the highest-grossing film in the franchise, a fitting finale to a decade-long cinematic journey. When The Philosopher's Stone was released in 2001, it was the highest-grossing film of that year, beating even The Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring at the box office. The success proved that fantasy films for children and young adults could be enormous commercial hits, not just cult classics. Hollywood took notice, and the landscape of blockbuster filmmaking shifted accordingly. The films brought Rowling's magical world to vivid life. Hogwarts Castle towered on screen, more magnificent than readers had imagined. Quidditch matches soared with cinematic energy. The special effects evolved with each film, growing darker and more sophisticated as the story progressed. Warner Brothers invested heavily in production values, ensuring high-quality special effects, talented actors, and experienced directors. The films largely remained faithful to the source material, satisfying fans while attracting new audiences. The cultural impact extended far beyond books and films. Theme parks opened, starting with the Wizarding World of Harry Potter in Orlando, Florida in 2010. The opening was one of the biggest theme park releases in the world, with fans lining up at 5 o'clock in the morning. The parks, now spread across Hollywood, Japan, and other countries, sparked a wave of fandom-inspired tourism, creating jobs and bolstering local economies. Merchandise flooded the market: wands, robes, Bertie Bott's every flavor beans, even replicas of Hogwarts acceptance letters complete with wax seals. Fans could own a piece of the Wizarding World, bringing magic into their everyday lives. A survey found that 20% of people had read all the books and 32% had read at least one Harry Potter book. In contrast, 25% had seen all the movies and 61% had seen at least one movie, proving the massive reach of both mediums. The fandom itself became a phenomenon. Fan fiction exploded online, with millions of stories set in Rowling's universe. Fans formed communities, attended conventions, created elaborate cosplays. Harry Potter spawned its own academic discipline, with scholars analyzing the book's literary techniques, social commentary, and educational value. The franchise raised issues far beyond typical children's literature. Social problems, family struggles, fascism, and politics were mentioned alongside the magic, making it much more substantial than ordinary children's books. Teachers used the books to discuss ethics, history, and social justice. The series became a common reference point across generations and cultures, a shared mythology for the modern world. In 2016, Rowling returned to the Wizarding World, collaborating with playwright Jack Thorne and director John Tiffany on Harry Potter and the Cursed Child, a stage play that continued Harry's story. She also wrote the screenplay for Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, set before Harry's time and featuring magizoologist Newt Scamander. 2 more Fantastic Beasts films followed in 2018 and 2022. The lessons Harry Potter taught went far beyond the Wizarding World. The series showed young readers that being different, being the odd one out, the one who doesn't fit in, doesn't make you weak. It makes you special. That intelligence and cleverness, embodied by Hermione, are virtues to be celebrated, not hidden. That loyalty and friendship, shown through Ron, matter more than wealth or status. The books taught that standing up for what's right is terrifying and necessary. That prejudice and discrimination are real evils that must be actively fought. That adults don't have all the answers, and sometimes young people must step up and lead. That grief is natural and healing takes time. That love, real, deep, sacrificial love, is the most powerful magic of all. For a generation of readers, Harry Potter provided comfort during difficult times, excitement during mundane days, and friends who felt real even though they existed only on pages. The books became rites of passage, children received Hogwarts letters on their 11th birthdays, adolescents wrestled with the darker themes of the later books as they themselves confronted a more complex world. Rowling's own story became part of the mythology. The struggling single mother who wrote in cafes, who went from welfare to billionaire through sheer determination and talent, embodied the very themes her books championed, that ordinary people can accomplish extraordinary things, that circumstances don't define destiny, that perseverance matters. The woman who had no pen on a delayed train in 1990 created something that transcended entertainment. Harry Potter became a cultural touchstone, a shared language, a lens through which millions of people understood bravery, friendship, and hope. The franchise generated not just billions of dollars but countless readers who might never have discovered the joy of books otherwise. In classrooms around the world, teachers introduced students to reading through Harry's adventures. Reluctant readers devoured 700-page novels they once would have avoided. Parents and children found common ground discussing plot twists and favorite characters. Libraries saw circulation surge. Bookstores hosted midnight release parties where thousands gathered to celebrate the arrival of the next install. Element. The impact on literacy cannot be overstated. Harry Potter made reading not just acceptable but cool. It created a generation of readers who would go on to explore other books, other genres, other stories. Publishers benefited as the rising tide lifted all boats. If kids loved Harry Potter, maybe they'd love other fantasy series too. The young adult fiction market exploded in Harry Potter's wake. Yet the franchise's reach extended beyond literacy. It shaped how a generation thought about morality and ethics. When faced with real-world injustice, many young people consciously or unconsciously drew on lessons learned from Harry Potter. The comparison of authoritarian regimes to Voldemort's followers became common political shorthand. The courage required to stand up to friends and authority figures, as embodied by Neville Longbottom's journey, inspired real acts of bravery. The series also demonstrated the power of representation and the danger of its absence. Rowling faced criticism for the lack of diversity in the original books and later attempts to retcon representation that wasn't on the page. These conversations, while uncomfortable, were important. They showed how much these stories mattered to readers who wanted to see themselves reflected in the wizarding world. As Rowling became more publicly controversial with her statements on transgender issues beginning in 2019, many fans found themselves grappling with how to reconcile their love for Harry Potter with their disagreement with the author's views. The franchise they'd grown up with, that had taught them about acceptance and fighting discrimination, now sat uneasily alongside positions many felt contradicted those very lessons. It raised complex questions about separating art from artist, about whose stories belong to once they're released into the world. But whatever complications arose, the core of what Harry Potter achieved remained. A struggling single mother with an idea on a train had created one of the most successful and influential franchises in history. She'd given millions of readers characters who felt like friends, a world they wished was real, and lessons that shaped their understanding of courage and compassion. The 7 books published between 1997 and 2007 told a complete story, from the boy who survived in a cupboard under the stairs to the man who walked willingly to his death to save others, and emerged triumphant not through superior power but through love and sacrifice. It was a hero's journey that resonated across cultures and generations. Harry Potter proved that children's literature could be profound, that fantasy could tackle real-world issues, that magic could illuminate truth. It showed that books could bring people together, create communities, change lives. It demonstrated that a story, if told with enough heart and honesty, could become more than entertainment. It could become part of the cultural fabric, a shared experience that binds people together. From a delayed train in 1990 to a global empire worth billions, from welfare and rejection to unprecedented success, J.K. Rowling's journey mirrored the hero's journey she wrote about. She faced her trials, found her strength, and emerged transformed. And in the process, she gave the world a boy wizard who taught us all that we have magic within us too, the magic of courage, friendship, and love. The generation that grew up reading Harry Potter carried those lessons forward. They became teachers and writers, activists and artists, parents who read the books to their own children. They wore their house scarves with pride, quoted Dumbledore in graduation speeches, and saw the world through the lens of the stories that shaped their childhoods. That train delay in 1990 lasted 4 hours. But the story it inspired? That magic would last forever. Just as the books promised, the ones who love us never really leave us. And neither, it seems, will Harry Potter. Chapter 4, One Ring to Rule Them All, The Middle-earth Saga. In 1914, as Europe descended into the chaos of the First World War, a young Oxford undergraduate named John Ronald Royal Tolkien began sketching stories and inventing languages. What started as a private creative project, an attempt to create a mythology for England, would evolve over 6 decades into the most complete fictional world ever conceived. Tolkien began dreaming up Middle-earth in 1914 as an Oxford undergraduate at the outbreak of World War I, in which he went on to fight as a British Army officer at the Battle of the Somme. The horrors he witnessed there, the mud and blood and senseless death, would haunt him for the rest of his life and seep into his mythology. Middle-earth wasn't an escape from reality. It was a lens through which Tolkien could examine the deepest truths about good, evil, courage, and the corrupting nature of power. But here's what makes Tolkien's achievement so extraordinary: he wasn't writing adventure stories. He was creating languages first, then building entire civilizations to speak them. He was crafting thousands of years of history, complete with songs, poems, genealogies, and calendars. He was inventing not just a story but an entire world with its own internal logic and consistency. The problem was that this obsessive world-building made his work virtually unfilmable. The books were too long, too complex, too linguistically dense. For decades after The Lord of the Rings was published in the 1950s, Hollywood considered it impossible to adapt. Too many characters. Too much walking. Too much poetry. How could you possibly translate Tolkien's 1,000-page epic to the screen without losing everything that made it special? The answer would come from an unlikely source, a self-taught filmmaker from New Zealand who grew up thousands of miles from Hollywood, making horror comedies with his friends on weekends. Peter Jackson would do what everyone said couldn't be done. And in the process, he would create one of the most awarded and successful film trilogies in cinema history. But to understand how Jackson's films changed everything, we first need to understand the man who spent a lifetime building Middle-earth, one invented word at a time. John Ronald Royal Tolkien was born in South Africa in 1892 but moved to England as a young child. He showed an early fascination with languages, particularly Old English, Finnish, and Welsh. By his teenage years, he was already inventing his own languages, not simple codes or ciphers, but complete linguistic systems with grammar, vocabulary, and evolution over time. The legendarium's origins reach back to 1914, when Tolkien began writing poems and story sketches, drawing maps, and inventing languages and names as a private project to create a mythology for England. His earliest story, The Voyage of Eärendil, The Evening Star, dates from 1914. This was just the beginning of what would become a lifetime's work. After surviving the Battle of the Somme, where many of his closest friends were killed, Tolkien returned to England and began building what he called his legendarium in earnest. He became a professor of English language at the University of Leeds and later at Oxford, specializing in Anglo-Saxon literature and Beowulf. His day job involved studying ancient languages and myths. His night job was creating his own. The work consumed him. Tolkien revised and rewrote the legendarium stories for most of his adult life. He filled thousands of pages with drafts, revisions, alternative versions, and linguistic notes. His son Christopher would later spend decades editing and organizing these manuscripts into publishable form. Then something unexpected happened. In the 1930s, while grading student papers, Tolkien found a blank page and wrote on it, "In a hole in the ground there lived a hobbit." He didn't know what a hobbit was, but the sentence intrigued him. He began writing a children's story about this creature, showing it to his friend C.S. Lewis and his own children. The Hobbit, 1937, Tolkien's first published novel, was not originally part of the larger mythology but became linked to it. When The Hobbit was published in 1937, it became a surprise success. The publisher asked for a sequel. Tolkien agreed, thinking he'd write another light-hearted adventure for children. Instead, the sequel grew darker, longer, more complex. What began as a simple quest story evolved into an epic about the nature of power, the burden of duty, and the courage required to do what's right even when hope seems lost. Tolkien began to revise the Silmarillion, but soon turned to the sequel, which became The Lord of the Rings. The writing took 17 years. Tolkien struggled with the story, constantly revising, losing confidence, setting it aside for months or years. His friend C.S. Lewis and a group of fellow writers known as the Inklings encouraged him to continue, reading drafts aloud at their weekly meetings at the Eagle and Child pub in Oxford. Finally, in 1954 and 1955, The Lord of the Rings was published in 3 volumes, The Fellowship of the Ring, The Two Towers, and The Return of the King. The books told the story of Frodo Baggins, a small hobbit from the Shire who inherits a magic ring that turns out to be the One Ring, a weapon of terrible power created by the Dark Lord Sauron to dominate all of Middle-earth. To prevent Sauron from regaining the ring and conquering the free peoples of Middle-earth, Frodo must carry it across a continent and destroy it in the fires of Mount Doom where it was forged. The critical response was mixed. Some readers, like C.S. Lewis, were enchanted. Lewis praised the book's ability to pierce like swords or burn like cold iron. Others found them baffling, juvenile, or too densely packed with invented languages and genealogies. The literary establishment largely dismissed them as children's books dressed up with pretentious mythology. But readers loved them. The books became cult classics, especially among college students in the 1960s. Frodo Lives became a popular slogan. The book sold millions of copies. Fans memorized passages, learned Elvish, drew maps. Tolkien had created something unprecedented, a fully realized secondary world that readers could lose themselves in. Yet Tolkien in his old age failed to complete the Silmarillion, the prequel to The Lord of the Rings, and left it to his youngest son, Christopher, to edit and publish, 1977. When Tolkien died in 1973, he left behind a massive collection of unpublished manuscripts. The History of Middle-earth was first published between 1983 and 1996. Compiled and edited by Christopher Tolkien, the series traces the development of Tolkien's legendarium from its earliest conception 100 years ago in the Book of Lost Tales through to essays written shortly before Tolkien's death in 1973. These 12 volumes revealed the astonishing depth and complexity of Tolkien's creation. He had spent 60 years building Middle-earth, revising and refining, adding layers of history and language. It was an act of creation unlike anything in literary history, a single person inventing an entire mythology from scratch. For decades, Hollywood circled The Lord of the Rings but couldn't figure out how to adapt it. An animated version directed by Ralph Bakshi was released in 1978, covering about half the story before running out of money. It confused audiences and never received a sequel. The consensus was clear: The Lord of the Rings was unfilmable. Then along came Peter Jackson. Born in 1961 in Pukerua Bay, New Zealand, Jackson was obsessed with movies from childhood. At age 9, he started shooting short films with his parents' movie camera. As a teenager, he saw Bakshi's animated Lord of the Rings and found it confusing but intriguing enough to make him read the books. Jackson fell in love with Middle-earth. He later said, "I read the book when I was 18 years old and thought then, I can't wait till the movie comes out. 20 years later, no one had done it, so I got impatient." By the mid-1990s, Jackson had established himself as a talented director of low-budget horror films and the critically acclaimed drama Heavenly Creatures. He and his partner Fran Walsh were looking for a big fantasy project when they kept coming back to The Lord of the Rings. They assumed the film rights were held by a major studio, but discovered they were available from independent producer Saul Zaentz. Jackson pitched the project to various studios. His vision was ambitious: shoot all 3 films simultaneously in New Zealand, with unprecedented attention to detail and practical effects supplemented by cutting-edge CGI. The budget would be enormous. The risk would be staggering. Most studios rejected the idea as insane. Finally, New Line Cinema agreed to finance the project. The 3 lavishly produced Lord of the Rings films ended up costing more than $300 million to make. It was a massive gamble. If the first film failed, New Line would lose hundreds of millions of dollars. Jackson insisted on shooting everything in New Zealand, using the country's spectacular landscapes to bring Middle-earth to life. He assembled a massive international cast including Elijah Wood as Frodo, Ian McKellen as Gandalf, Viggo Mortensen as Aragorn, and dozens of others. Principal photography for all 3 films took place in New Zealand over a continuous 18-month period. It was the first time that 3 films had ever been shot together in this way. The production was monumental. Jackson's special effects company, Weta Digital, created groundbreaking technology to render massive battle scenes, digital characters, and fantastical creatures. The crown jewel was Gollum, a fully digital character whose performance was captured from actor Andy Serkis. Gollum wasn't just a visual effect, he was an emotionally complex, sympathetic character brought to life through revolutionary motion capture technology. Every detail mattered to Jackson. The team created real chainmail armor, forged actual weapons, built enormous sets. The Shire looked like a place you could actually live. Minas Tirith towered like a real city. The attention to craftsmanship honored Tolkien's own obsessive world building. The Fellowship of the Ring premiered in December 2001, and the response was overwhelming. The movie was made on a budget of $93 million and it ended its box office run grossing $897.7 million worldwide. It broke several box office records and became the second highest grossing movie of 2001. Critics praised Jackson's respectful adaptation that captured the spirit of Tolkien's work while making it accessible to modern audiences. The Fellowship of the Ring received 13 Academy Award nominations, winning in 4 categories. The films had successfully translated Tolkien's unfilmable epic to the screen. Fans of the books saw their beloved story honored. New audiences discovered Middle-earth for the first time. The Two Towers followed in December 2002, and The Return of the King in December 2003. Each film built on the success of the previous one. The trio earned $2.99 billion at the box office. But the financial success, as impressive as it was, paled beside the critical acclaim. The 3 films together were nominated for a total of 30 Academy Awards, of which they won 17, both records for any movie trilogy. The Return of the King was particularly celebrated. The film won 11 Academy Awards, from 11 nominations, tying Titanic and Ben-Hur for the most Oscars won, as well as setting a new record for the highest clean sweep at the Oscars. It became the first fantasy film ever to win Best Picture. The Oscar sweep for The Return of the King was widely seen as recognition for the entire trilogy, a proxy award for Jackson's unprecedented achievement. He had done what everyone said was impossible. He had brought Tolkien's vision to life in a way that satisfied devoted fans while creating millions of new ones. The impact on fantasy cinema was immediate and profound. The Lord of the Rings proved that fantasy wasn't just for children, that complex mythological stories could work as mainstream entertainment, that audiences would invest in 3-hour epics if the storytelling was strong enough. Studios greenlit fantasy projects that had languished in development for years. The genre was reborn. The films also revolutionized visual effects and production practices. Jackson's approach, shooting multiple films simultaneously, blending practical effects with digital technology, using motion capture for character performance, became industry standard. Along with the Harry Potter films, the series has renewed interest in the fantasy film genre. New Zealand benefited enormously. Tourism in New Zealand is up, possibly due to its exposure in the series. Fans flocked to visit filming locations. Jackson had put his home country on the map as a viable alternative to Hollywood for major film production. But beyond the box office numbers, the awards, and the technical innovations, the Lord of the Rings films succeeded because they understood what Tolkien was really writing about. Yes, there were orcs and wizards and magic rings. But at its core, Tolkien's story explored profound themes that resonated across cultures and generations. The corrupting nature of power sits at the heart of the narrative. The One Ring offers unlimited power to whoever wields it, but that power inevitably corrupts even the most well-intentioned bearer. Boromir, a good man, is tempted by the ring and falls. Gollum, once a creature much like a hobbit, is destroyed by his obsession with it. Even Frodo, the hero, cannot ultimately resist its pull. The message is clear: some powers are too dangerous to be wielded by anyone, no matter how noble their intentions. Yet the story also emphasizes that even the smallest person can change the course of history. Frodo is no warrior. He's small, weak, an unlikely hero. But he possesses something more important than strength: courage, loyalty, and the willingness to carry an impossible burden because someone must. Tolkien, who had seen so many of his friends die in the trenches of World War I, understood that heroism wasn't about glory or power. It was about ordinary people doing extraordinary things because it was right. The theme of sacrifice runs throughout the trilogy. Gandalf sacrifices himself to save the Fellowship in Moria. Boromir redeems himself by dying to protect Merry and Pippin. Frodo sacrifices his innocence, his health, ultimately his ability to live peacefully in the Shire, to save Middle-earth. The message resonates: some causes are worth sacrificing for. Freedom, friendship, the survival of good in the world, these matter more than individual comfort or safety. Tolkien also explored what we might now call environmental themes. The Shire represents a pastoral ideal, a harmony between civilization and nature. The industrialization of Isengard, where Saruman tears down ancient forests to fuel his war machine, represents the destruction of that harmony. In the books, when the hobbits return home, they find the Shire scarred by industrial pollution, a warning that no place is safe from the corrupting forces of greed and exploitation. Perhaps most importantly, The Lord of the Rings celebrates the power of friendship and fellowship. Frodo couldn't have succeeded alone. Sam's loyalty and devotion literally carry Frodo up Mount Doom when he can no longer walk. Merry and Pippin's courage grows throughout the journey. Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli forge an unlikely friendship across ancient racial divisions. The Fellowship breaks, but the bonds formed within it endure. Together, these diverse peoples, hobbits, elves, dwarfs, men, wizards, accomplish what none could have managed alone. These themes gave The Lord of the Rings a weight and depth that elevated it above typical fantasy adventures. Jackson's films understood this. They didn't just show battles and special effects. They focused on the characters' emotional journeys, the burden Frodo carries, the sacrifice required to do what's right. When audiences wept at Gandalf's fall, or Sam's declaration that he can't carry the ring but he can carry Frodo, or Aragorn's coronation where he bows before four small hobbits, they weren't crying over special effects. They were connecting with themes that Tolkien had woven into his mythology, themes drawn from ancient myths, from his own wartime trauma, from his Catholic faith, from his love of nature and languages. The films taught a new generation what Tolkien had taught readers for decades. That power corrupts and must be surrendered, not seized. That the smallest among us can make the greatest difference. That friendship and loyalty are worth dying for. That evil is real and must be resisted, even when the cost is high. That home is worth fighting for, but sometimes you have to leave it to save it. These weren't new lessons. They're the same lessons found in Beowulf, in Norse sagas, in ancient Greek epics. Tolkien, the Oxford scholar of ancient literature, had created a modern myth that tapped into the same deep wells that had sustained human cultures for millennia. Jackson, in turn, had translated that myth into a visual language that could reach audiences who might never pick up the books. The success of the Lord of the Rings trilogy proved something crucial about franchise filmmaking: authenticity matters. Jackson didn't try to modernize or to improve Tolkien. He approached the material with reverence and love, spending years in New Zealand bringing every detail to life with care and craftsmanship. That respect showed in every frame, and audiences rewarded it with their loyalty and enthusiasm. Jackson would later return to Middle-earth with a trilogy based on The Hobbit, released between 2012 and 2014. The three Hobbit films earned $2.93 billion. While financially successful, these films struggled with the challenge of expanding a single children's book into three lengthy movies. They demonstrated the risks of overextending a franchise, of trying to recapture lightning in a bottle. But nothing could diminish what Jackson had achieved with The Lord of the Rings. He had taken a work that everyone said was unfilmable, too long, too complex, too expensive, too weird, and created one of the most successful and acclaimed film trilogies in history. He had proven that audiences would embrace long-form fantasy storytelling if it was done with intelligence and craft. More importantly, he had given millions of people around the world a shared experience of wonder. For 3 years, audiences returned to theaters every December to continue the journey through Middle-earth. They followed Frodo's quest, lived through the battles, celebrated the triumphs, mourned the losses. They became part of the Fellowship. Tolkien had spent 60 years building Middle-earth in the quiet of his Oxford study, filling notebooks with invented languages and mythologies, creating a world more complete than any before. Jackson spent a decade bringing that world to vivid life on screen. Between them, they gave us one of the great mythologies of the modern age, a story of hobbits and elves and the eternal struggle between good and evil that resonates as deeply today as ancient myths did for our ancestors. The professor and the filmmaker, separated by an ocean and several generations, shared a common goal: to create a secondary world so rich and real that we could lose ourselves in it, learn from it, and return to our own world changed. They succeeded beyond anyone's expectations. And somewhere in the Shire, in a hole in the ground, there still lives a hobbit. His story continues to inspire new generations, reminding us that even in our darkest hours, hope remains. That friendship endures. That the smallest among us can change the world. That the journey there and back again is always worth taking. One ring to rule them all indeed. But in the end, it was the story itself, of courage and sacrifice and friendship, that truly ruled our hearts. Chapter 5, License to Thrill, The James Bond Legacy. On February 17, 1952, Ian Fleming sat down at his GoldenEye estate in Jamaica and began typing. He had just turned 44, and he was about to get married to a woman he wasn't entirely sure he wanted to marry. So he did what many anxious men might do in his situation: he threw himself into work. Except Fleming's work was creating a spy who would become the most enduring fictional character of the 20th century. Fleming typed out 2,000 words that morning, straight from his imagination. By March 18, he had completed the manuscript for Casino Royale. He was unsure whether it was any good, but his friend William Plomer encouraged him to seek publication. When Casino Royale was released in the UK on April 13, 1953, it launched not just a literary phenomenon but the longest-running film franchise in history, one that would span more than 6 decades, 7 lead actors, and 27 films. But James Bond's journey from page to screen was far from inevitable. In fact, the character almost didn't make it at all. And even when the films finally got made, nobody predicted they would still be pulling in hundreds of millions of dollars 70 years later. The story of James Bond is ultimately about survival, about a franchise that has constantly reinvented itself while staying true to its core, adapting to changing times while maintaining the essential elements that made audiences fall in love with 007 in the first place. Ian Lancaster Fleming was born in 1908 into a wealthy family with connections to merchant banking. His father, Valentine Fleming, was a Member of Parliament who died in action on the Western Front in 1917 when Ian was just 9 years old. That loss would shape Fleming's life and, eventually, his fiction. After an undistinguished academic career at Eton and Sandhurst, Fleming bounced through various jobs: stockbroker, journalist, banker, never quite settling into any of them. Then came the Second World War, and Fleming found his calling. He worked for Britain's Naval Intelligence Division, where he was involved in planning operations and overseeing intelligence units. Fleming met secret agents, commandos, and spies, men who operated in the shadows, who lived by their wits and their courage. Years later, he would admit that James Bond was a compound of all the secret agents and commando types I met during the war. But Bond wasn't just a composite of real spies. Fleming poured himself into the character too: his love of gambling, his taste for scrambled eggs, his preference for vodka martinis, even his golf handicap. Bond became a fantasy version of Fleming himself, more athletic, more deadly, more sexually successful, but recognizably cut from the same cloth. The name James Bond came from a rather unlikely source. Fleming was an avid birdwatcher, and he owned a copy of the Field Guide to the Birds of the West Indies by an American ornithologist named James Bond. Fleming later explained his choice: "I wanted Bond to be an extremely dull, uninteresting man to whom things happened. I wanted him to be a blunt instrument. When I was casting around for a name for my protagonist, I thought, by God, James Bond is the dullest name I ever heard. Originally, Fleming had considered naming his protagonist James Secreton, which sounds uncomfortably close to the French "c'est crétin," a meaning that's stupid. In retrospect, James Bond was definitely the better choice. Casino Royale introduced readers to Commander James Bond, Agent 007 of MI6, with a license to kill. The novel opens not with action but with atmosphere. The scent and smoke and sweat of a casino are nauseating at 3 in the morning. From the first page, Fleming established Bond as both glamorous and gritty, sophisticated yet brutal. Bond's mission in Casino Royale was to bankrupt Le Chiffre, a Soviet agent, at the baccarat tables of a French casino. The plot involved high-stakes gambling, torture, betrayal, and a tragic love affair with Vesper Lind, a double agent who ultimately commits suicide. The novel was a success in Britain. The first edition of 4,728 copies sold out in less than a month. A second print run that same month also sold out, as did a third run of over 8,000 books published in May 1954. Fleming had found his audience, and he would spend the rest of his life giving them more Bond adventures. After the publication of Casino Royale, Fleming used his annual holiday at his Jamaican estate to write another Bond story each year. Between 1953 and 1964, Fleming wrote 12 novels and 2 short story collections featuring 007. The books sold over 100 million copies worldwide and were translated into numerous languages. President John F. Kennedy's mention of From Russia with Love as one of his favorite books in 1961 helped boost sales dramatically in the United States, cementing Bond's status as a cultural phenomenon. The novels evolved alongside the Cold War that inspired them. The early books featured SMERSH, the Soviet counterintelligence agency, as Bond's primary antagonist. Later novels introduced Spectre, a criminal organization led by the villainous Ernst Stavro Blofeld, as Cold War tensions began to thaw. Fleming's Bond was harder-edged than the cinematic version would become, more brutal, more flawed, more psychologically complex. Fleming said of his work that while thrillers may not be literature with a capital L, it was possible to write thrillers designed to be read as literature. But it was the films that would transform James Bond from a popular character into a global icon. In 1961, producers Albert R. Cubby Broccoli and Harry Saltzman purchased the filming rights to Fleming's novels and founded Eon Productions. With financial backing from United Artists, they set out to make Dr. No, the first Bond film. Most major studios had turned the project down, considering it too British and too sexual for American audiences. The casting of James Bond was crucial. United Artists wanted Cary Grant, but Grant had no interest in committing to a franchise. After hundreds of auditions, Broccoli and Saltzman settled on a relatively unknown Scottish actor named Sean Connery. Connery didn't fit the traditional image of a refined British spy. He was working class, rough around the edges. But when he walked into the audition, he pounded the desk and told us what he wanted, Broccoli recalled. What impressed us was that he had balls. Director Terence Young took Connery under his wing, essentially putting him through Bond finishing school. Young took Connery to his tailor, his shirt maker, his shoemaker, teaching him the proper Eton manner. The transformation worked. When Dr. No was released in 1962 with a modest budget of about $1 million, Connery embodied Bond perfectly, suave but dangerous, charming but ruthless, sophisticated yet capable of brutal violence. Dr. No broke box office records for United Artists, grossing $59.6 million worldwide, over $622 million in today's dollars. Many of the features we associate with Bond films today were established in this first outing: the iconic gun barrel sequence, the famous theme music by Monty Norman, the exotic locations, the beautiful women, the dry humor mixed with deadly action. Although it received mixed reviews at the time, Dr. No is now regarded as one of the best classic Bond films, and it launched what would become one of cinema's most successful franchises. The producers immediately greenlit a sequel. From Russia with Love, 1963, refined the formula, offering what many consider one of the finest Bond films ever made. Taut, suspenseful, relatively grounded. Then came Goldfinger, 1964, which took everything to the next level and set the template for all future Bond films. With a memorable villain, Auric Goldfinger, an iconic henchman, Oddjob with his deadly hat, a dubiously named femme fatale, pussy galore, and gadgets galore including an Aston Martin with an ejector seat, Goldfinger became one of the first films in history to gross over $100 million worldwide, well over $1 billion in today's money. The success continued with Thunderball, 1965, which had triple the budget of Goldfinger and became an even bigger hit. By this point, the budgets had grown from $1.2 million for Dr. No to $9 million for Thunderball, showing the studio's growing ambitions for the franchise. Bond mania swept the globe. The films were cultural events. Children played with Bond toys. Men wanted to dress like Bond. Women wanted to date Bond. The phrase Bond, James Bond entered the lexicon, as did shaken, not stirred. But Connery was growing tired of the role. After You Only Live Twice, 1967, he left the franchise, exhausted by the grueling production schedules and feeling typecast. The producers scrambled to find a replacement and settled on George Lazenby, an Australian model with no acting experience. Lazenby starred in On Her Majesty's Secret Service, 1969, which, despite being one of the most faithful and emotionally resonant adaptations of Fleming's work, was a relative disappointment at the box office. Lazenby's inexperience showed, and he departed after just one film. Connery returned for one more official Eon production, Diamonds Are Forever, 1971, lured back by popular demand and a then record $1.25 million salary. The film was a commercial success, but Connery was done for good this time. The franchise needed a new Bond for the long term. Enter Roger Moore, who would play Bond 7 times between 1973 and 1985, more than any other actor. Moore's Bond was lighter, more humorous, more overtly tongue-in-cheek. Where Connery's Bond was a blunt instrument with sardonic wit, Moore's Bond was a sophisticated gentleman who happened to be a spy. Films like The Spy Who Loved Me in 1977, which grossed over $800 million in today's dollars, and Moonraker, 1979, which sent Bond to space in a $34 million production, embraced camp and spectacle. The formula became more predictable: exotic locations, increasingly elaborate gadgets, absurd villains, quips and one-liners, but audiences still loved it. By the time Moore departed in 1985, some critics felt the franchise had become too campy, too reliant on formula. Timothy Dalton took over, bringing a darker, more Fleming-esque interpretation closer to the literary Bond. His two films, The Living Daylights, 1987, and License to Kill, 1989, were grittier and more violent, but they didn't connect with audiences the same way. After a 6-year legal hiatus, the franchise rebooted with Pierce Brosnan. Brosnan's four films between 1995 and 2002 revitalized the franchise for the post-Cold War era. GoldenEye, 1995, was the first Bond film to use CGI and featured Judi Dench as M, the first woman to play the part. The film grossed over $738 million adjusted for inflation and proved Bond was still relevant even after the Soviet Union's collapse. Brosnan balanced Moore's charm with Connery's edge, and his films were massive commercial successes, with Die Another Day, 2002, grossing nearly $500 million worldwide. But by 2002, audiences were changing. The Austin Powers films had brilliantly parodied the Bond formula, making it difficult to take the franchise seriously in its current form. The Bourne films were offering grittier, more realistic spy action. Bond needed to evolve or risk becoming irrelevant. Enter Daniel Craig. When Craig was cast as Bond in 2005, the backlash was immediate. Blonde-haired, rough-featured, lacking the traditional polish of previous Bonds, Craig seemed all wrong to many fans. But Casino Royale, 2006 silenced the critics. This wasn't just a reboot, it was a complete reinvention. Craig's Bond was harder, more vulnerable, more flawed. The film stripped away the gadgets and camp, returning to Fleming's original vision of Bond as a blunt instrument. It showed Bond earning his 0-0 status, falling in love with Vesper Lynd, and having his heart broken, emotional depth the films had rarely explored. Casino Royale was a critical and commercial triumph, transforming both the franchise's fortunes and Craig's reputation. Many critics called him the best Bond since Connery. The film's darker tone, stunning action sequences, and emotional resonance proved that Bond could still be relevant in the 21st century. Craig's 5 films explored Bond's psychology, his relationships, his doubts and vulnerabilities in ways previous films hadn't. Skyfall, 2012, became the highest-grossing Bond film of all time, earning over $1.1 billion worldwide, proving that audiences craved this more complex, more human version of 007. By the time Craig departed with No Time to Die, 2021, he had redefined what Bond could be, taking the franchise to unprecedented critical and commercial heights. As of 2021, the James Bond film franchise has grossed over $7.04 billion at the global box office, making it the 5th highest-grossing film series in history. The franchise has endured for over 6 decades, surviving changing cultural attitudes, evolving political landscapes, and shifting audience expectations. 7 actors have played Bond, each bringing their own interpretation while maintaining the essential elements that define the character. What's remarkable about the Bond franchise is its ability to reinvent itself while staying recognizable. Each era reflects its time. Connery's Bond embodied 1960s Cold War anxieties and sexual liberation. Moore's embraced 1970s détente and camp spectacle. Brosnan's navigated the post-Cold War 1990s. Craig's confronted post-War 9/11 cynicism and moral complexity. Yet in every era, Bond remained Bond, suave, dangerous, resourceful, dedicated to Queen and country. The films have taught audiences lessons that evolved with each generation. In the Connery era, Bond represented British resilience and ingenuity in the face of Soviet threats, the idea that individual courage and cleverness could prevail against overwhelming odds. As the franchise continued, it explored duty and patriotism, though increasingly with moral complexity. Bond serves his country, but at what personal cost? Craig's films particularly examined this, showing Bond as a man shaped and damaged by his work. The franchise has also reflected changing attitudes toward gender and relationships. The early film's treatment of women, summed up in the unfortunate term Bond girls, reflected 1960s sexism that looks deeply problematic today. Even in 2021, No Time to Die director Cary Fukunaga described Connery's version of Bond as basically a rapist. But the films evolved, slowly giving female characters more agency, intelligence, and complexity. Characters like Judi Dench and Léa Seydoux Madeleine Swann represented progress, though critics rightfully note the franchise still has work to do in this area. The Bond franchise has also taught the entertainment industry crucial lessons about longevity and adaptation. First, own your intellectual property and control your vision, a lesson Fleming learned when he sold film rights piecemeal, creating legal complications that lasted decades. Second, respect your source material while being willing to evolve it. The best Bond films honor Fleming's creation while recognizing that what worked in 1953 won't necessarily work today. Third, casting is everything. Each new Bond actor represents a calculated risk, a chance to either revitalize or kill the franchise. Perhaps most importantly, Bond taught Hollywood that franchises can survive actor changes if the character is larger than any single performer. Before Bond, the idea of multiple actors playing the same role across decades was unprecedented for a film franchise. Bond proved it could work, paving the way for other long-running franchises to recast their leads without starting from scratch. The franchise has also demonstrated the importance of cultural adaptation. Bond has survived the end of the Cold War, shifting gender politics, changing attitudes toward violence and sexuality, and evolving geopolitical realities. Each film reflects contemporary concerns while maintaining the core appeal of exotic locations, thrilling action, and a charismatic hero who saves the world in style. Approximately 20% of the world's population has seen at least one Bond film. Queen Elizabeth II was a fan, meeting the first 6 actors to play Bond and preferring the early films before they got so loud. President Kennedy's endorsement helped break Bond in America. The films have been both praised as exciting entertainment and criticized for violence, misogyny, and imperialism. They've been condemned by the Vatican and celebrated by audiences worldwide. They've been parodied, imitated, and referenced countless times in popular culture. In 2012, Disney acquired Lucasfilm and demonstrated that even the most personal creative visions could be successfully passed to new stewards. Now, as of early 2025, Amazon MGM has gained full creative control of the Bond franchise, with Amy Pascal and David Heyman taking over as producers and Denis Villeneuve announced as director for the next installment. The search is on for the next James Bond, and the cycle of reinvention continues. Who will play Bond next? Nobody knows. But we know this: whoever steps into those iconic shoes will be inheriting not just a role but a legacy. They'll be the latest in a line stretching back to 1962, when a Scottish actor with balls impressed producers and made cinema history. They'll be tasked with making Bond relevant for yet another generation while honoring everything that came before. The genius of the Bond franchise is that it understands something fundamental about storytelling. Archetypes endure, but their expressions must evolve. Bond is the hero who saves the world, the sophisticated gentleman, the blunt instrument, the lone wolf who ultimately serves something larger than himself. These core elements remain constant even as everything around them changes. From Fleming's typewriter in Jamaica to a global franchise worth billions, from Cold War paranoia to post-9/11 uncertainty, from Connery to Craig and beyond, James Bond has proven remarkably resilient. The character who was created as the dullest name Fleming could imagine became one of the most famous names in entertainment history. The mission continues. The franchise endures. And somewhere, in a tuxedo perfectly tailored, with a vodka martini shaken not stirred, James Bond will return. He always does. Because after more than 60 years, we still need heroes who can navigate impossible situations with style and wit, who can save the world and make it look easy, who remind us that courage and cleverness can triumph over any threat. My name is Bond. James Bond. 7 actors have spoken those words on screen. Many more will follow. And audiences, generation after generation, will always be thrilled to meet him again, for the first time. Chapter 6: Assemble. The Marvel Cinematic Universe. In the mid-2000s, Marvel Studios had a problem. They were broke, creatively hamstrung, and watching their most valuable characters make billions of dollars for other studios. Spider-Man was at Sony. The X-Men and Fantastic Four were at Fox. The characters Marvel still owned the rights to, Iron Man, Thor, Captain America, were considered B-list nobodies that nobody cared about. Most studios would have given up. Marvel Studios decided to bet everything. In 2005, Marvel Studios secured a $525 million loan from Merrill Lynch, putting up the film rights to nearly all their remaining characters as collateral. If their gamble failed, they would lose everything. Not just the money, but Iron Man, Captain America, Thor, Black Panther, Doctor Strange, and every other character they still controlled. It was one of the riskiest bets in Hollywood history. The man tasked with making it work was Kevin Feige, a relatively unknown producer who had cut his teeth working on earlier Marvel films at other studios. Feige had a vision that seemed crazy at the time. He wanted to create a shared universe where multiple franchises could coexist and crossover, just like the comic books. He wanted to make the Avengers, not as a standalone film, but as the culmination of multiple individual character films that would build toward an unprecedented team-up. Nobody had ever attempted anything like it. If it worked, it would revolutionize franchise filmmaking. If it failed, Marvel would cease to exist as an independent studio. The plan required starting with a character that most people had never heard of, casting an actor Hollywood considered unemployable, and trusting a comedy director to launch the entire enterprise. The odds of success were astronomical. But on May 2, 2008, when the lights dimmed in theaters across America and Robert Downey Jr. declared "I am Iron Man," everything changed. Kevin Feige was born in Boston in 1973 and grew up loving movies and comics. His grandfather, who ran an art house theater in New Jersey, nurtured his passion for cinema. After high school, Feige applied to USC's prestigious film school 5 times and was rejected every time. On his 6th attempt, he finally got in, graduating in 1995 with a degree in film, determined to work in an industry that had made it clear he wasn't wanted. His early career was unglamorous. He worked as an assistant, fetching coffee and making copies, learning the business from the ground up. His break came when producer Lauren Shuler Donner hired him to work on the first X-Men film in 2000. Feige's encyclopedic knowledge of Marvel Comics impressed Donner so much that she made him an associate producer. When the film became a hit, impressing Marvel's film division head Avi Orod, Feige was hired to work at Marvel Studios as Orod's second-in-command. Over the next few years, Feige worked as a producer on all the early Marvel films: X-Men 2, Spider-Man 2, Fantastic Four, Daredevil, Elektra, and the 2003 Hulk film. He saw firsthand how other studios adapted Marvel characters, sometimes with great success, sometimes disastrously. He learned what worked and what didn't. And he realized something crucial: Marvel was making relatively little profit from licensing deals with other studios. If they wanted to control their destiny and reap the full financial rewards, they needed to produce their own films. In the mid-2000s, Feige recognized that although Spider-Man, Blade, and the X-Men had been licensed to other studios, Marvel still owned the film rights to the core Avengers team. This realization would become the foundation for everything that followed. When Marvel Studios was formed as an independent production company in 2005, Feige was named president of production in March 2007, just as Iron Man began filming. Following the film's successful opening weekend in May 2008, he was promoted to president of Marvel Studios, a position he still holds today. But back in 2007, none of that success was guaranteed. Iron Man was a massive gamble. The character wasn't well known outside comic book circles. Tony Stark was an alcoholic arms dealer, not exactly traditional superhero material. And then there was the casting. Robert Downey Jr. was one of the most talented actors in Hollywood, but he was also considered one of the riskiest. His struggles with substance abuse were legendary. He had spent time in prison, been fired from multiple projects, and was largely uninsurable by Hollywood standards. When Marvel suggested him for Tony Stark, studio executives balked. Too risky. Too unpredictable. Find someone safer. But Feige and director Jon Favreau saw something in Downey that mirrored Tony Stark himself, a brilliant man who had fallen from grace and was fighting for redemption. They pushed for him. Finally, after Downey delivered what he later described as the most prepared screen test of his life, studying the material so intensely that he made it impossible for anybody to do a better job, he got the role. Jon Favreau himself was an unexpected choice to direct. His biggest hit was the Christmas film Elf, and his last directorial effort, the space adventure Zathura, had flopped. But Feige saw in Favreau someone who understood character and humor, who could ground a fantastic premise in emotional reality. It was a decision based on talent over resume, substance over marquee value, a philosophy that would define the MCU going forward. As Feige later explained, the philosophy Marvel followed was simple but revolutionary: actually read and respect the source material. For years, Hollywood executives had dismissed comic books as silly kids' stuff, too juvenile or too strange to take seriously. Feige realized that the comics that truly mattered to fans were the ones with three-dimensional characters and complex storytelling. Those were what needed to be adapted, not simplified or fixed for the screen, but honored and translated with care. Iron Man was filmed on a relatively modest budget with much of the dialogue improvised. Downey and director Favreau workshopped scenes extensively, finding the character's voice through experimentation. Early test screenings made it clear that audiences loved Tony Stark and the redemption arc he underwent. The character was interesting and complex outside the suit as well as inside it, exactly what Marvel needed to differentiate themselves from typical superhero fare. When Iron Man premiered on May 2, 2008, distributed by Paramount Pictures, it became an instant cultural phenomenon. The film grossed $585 million worldwide against a production budget that started modestly but eventually reached acceptable Hollywood levels. Critics praised it. Audiences loved it. And Robert Downey Jr.'s career was resurrected. He would eventually become one of the highest-paid actors in Hollywood, with Iron Man transforming from a B-list character into Marvel's flagship hero. But the real revolution happened in the final moments of the film. After the credits rolled, a scene appeared. Nick Fury, played by Samuel L. Jackson, shows up at Tony Stark's mansion to talk about the Avenger Initiative. Audiences who stayed through the credits witnessed the first building block of something unprecedented, a promise that this wasn't just a standalone film but the beginning of something bigger. Marvel wasted no time capitalizing on their success. In May 2008, immediately after Iron Man's opening weekend, they announced release dates for multiple future films: Iron Man 2 in 2010, Thor in 2010, Captain America in 2011, and The Avengers in 2011. The roadmap was clear. They were building toward something no studio had attempted before. The next film, The Incredible Hulk, released just 1 month after Iron Man in June 2008, was Marvel's attempt to bring Bruce Banner into their emerging cinematic universe. While the film was a decent effort starring Edward Norton, it didn't set the world on fire the way Iron Man had. But it included another crucial post-credit scene with Robert Downey Jr.'s Tony Stark, proving that these films were truly connected. The interconnected universe wasn't just marketing, it was real. Over the next 4 years, Marvel executed Phase 1 of their master plan. Iron Man 2, 2010, further developed Tony Stark while introducing Black Widow and setting up future plot threads. Thor, 2011, brought Asgardian mythology and cosmic elements into the universe. Captain America, the First Avenger, 2011, added a period piece set during World War II, introducing Steve Rogers and establishing that the MCU's history stretched back decades. Each film stood alone but added pieces to the larger puzzle. Characters made cameo appearances in each other's films. SHIELD agents connected the stories. The post-credit scenes became must-see events, with fans staying through every last credit to glimpse what was coming next. Feige initially referred to this shared narrative as the Marvel Cinema Universe, but by 2010, during press for Iron Man 2, he coined the term that would stick, the Marvel Cinematic Universe, or MCU. Then came May 4, 2012, and The Avengers. Director Joss Whedon brought together Iron Man, Captain America, Thor, Hulk, Black Widow, and Hawkeye for an unprecedented superhero team-up. The film was a critical and commercial phenomenon. Made on a budget of $220 million, The Avengers earned $1.518 billion worldwide, the first MCU film to cross the billion-dollar threshold. It became a cultural event, proving that audiences would embrace interconnected storytelling if done with intelligence and craft. The Avengers validated everything Feige had planned. The shared universe worked. Audiences cared about the connections between films. The post-credit scenes built anticipation. And most importantly, Marvel could take relatively unknown characters and turn them into global icons through strong filmmaking and respect for the source material. Phase 2 brought Guardians of the Galaxy, 2014, a film about a talking raccoon and a tree that somehow became a beloved hit. It proved Marvel could take their weirdest concepts and make them work. The phase continued with Avengers: Age of Ultron, 2015, and Ant-Man, 2015, constantly expanding the universe while maintaining quality and interconnectivity. Phase 3 reached new heights. Captain America: Civil War, 2016, pitted hero against hero in a complex exploration of accountability and freedom. Black Panther, 2018, became a cultural phenomenon, earning over $1.3 billion and becoming the first superhero film ever nominated for Best Picture at the Academy Awards. Feige received Academy Award, Golden Globe, and Producers Guild nominations for producing it, unprecedented recognition for a superhero film. Then came the Infinity Saga's climax. Avengers: Infinity War, 2018, shocked audiences by ending with the villain's victory, with half of all life in the universe disintegrating into dust. The film earned over $2 billion worldwide. But it was merely set up for what came next. Avengers: Endgame premiered in April 2019 as the culmination of 21 films across 11 years. It was the finale every fan had been waiting for, the payoff to a decade of storytelling. The anticipation was unprecedented. Advance ticket sales broke records. Theaters added midnight screenings and round-the-clock showings to meet demand. When the film opened, it delivered an estimated $350 million in its first 3 days domestically and a staggering $1.2 billion globally in just its first 5 days. It became the fastest film to gross $1 billion worldwide. By the time Endgame finished its theatrical run, it had earned $2.79 billion at the global box office, briefly becoming the highest-grossing film of all time before Avatar reclaimed the title after a re-release. More importantly, Endgame delivered an emotionally satisfying conclusion to storylines that had been building for over a decade. When Tony Stark sacrificed himself to save the universe, audiences around the world wept, not just for a fictional character, but for the end of an era. The success of Kevin Feige's vision is almost incomprehensible. The films he has produced have a combined worldwide box office gross of over $31 billion, making him the highest-grossing producer of all time. Marvel Studios has released 37 films within the MCU from 2008 to 2021, with more continuing to arrive. The franchise has expanded to Disney Plus streaming series, giving spotlight to supporting characters and further developing the universe in ways feature films don't have time for. But the MCU's impact goes far beyond box office numbers. It fundamentally changed how Hollywood thinks about franchise filmmaking. The idea of a cinematic universe, multiple franchises existing in the same world, building toward larger crossover events, has become the industry standard. DC attempted it with their own superhero universe. Universal tried with their dark universe of monster movies, which failed. Star Wars expanded into a cinematic universe under Disney. Everyone wanted what Marvel had created. The MCU also democratized superhero cinema. Before Iron Man, superhero films focused on the most famous characters: Superman, Batman, Spider-Man. The MCU proved that with strong storytelling and charismatic actors, even obscure characters could become beloved. Guardians of the Galaxy was a D-list comic. Black Panther had never headlined his own film. Ant-Man was a joke even among comic fans. Yet all became billion-dollar properties. The franchise revolutionized how studios approach long-term planning. Feige and his team planned the MCU years in advance, with storylines seeded in early films that won't pay off until much later. The Infinity Stones were introduced across multiple films, building toward Thanos' quest to collect them all. Casual references in one film become central plots in another. The level of planning and coordination required is unprecedented in cinema history. Most importantly, the MCU taught audiences, and Hollywood, crucial lessons about what makes franchises work. First, character matters more than spectacle. The MCU's greatest weapon isn't its visual effects budget, it's that audiences care deeply about Tony Stark, Steve Rogers, Natasha Romanoff, and the others. These characters feel real, flawed, human. When they succeed, we cheer. When they fail, we hurt. When they die, we mourn. Second, consequences matter. Unlike many superhero franchises where everything resets at the end, the MCU lets actions have lasting impact. Tony Stark suffers from PTSD after the Avengers. Characters die and stay dead. Relationships evolve. The world changes. This gives weight to the storytelling. We believe these events matter because we see their repercussions. Third, diversity strengthens rather than weakens franchises. Black Panther proved that a predominantly black superhero film could be one of the most successful movies ever made. Captain Marvel showed that female-led superhero films could earn over $1 billion. Shang-Chi demonstrated that Asian-led blockbusters have global appeal. The MCU's increasing diversity hasn't hurt its popularity, it's expanded its reach. Fourth, humor and heart are essential. The MCU doesn't take itself too seriously. It understands that audiences come to superhero films to have fun, to laugh, to feel. The best MCU films balance spectacular action with genuine emotion, epic stakes with human moments. Thor: Ragnarok revitalized a flagging franchise by injecting humor. Guardians of the Galaxy made audiences cry over a tree saying "We are Groot." The themes the MCU explores resonate across cultures and generations. The franchise examines power and responsibility. Tony Stark's journey from selfish billionaire to selfless hero epitomizes this. It explores the cost of heroism, showing that being a hero requires sacrifice, sometimes the ultimate sacrifice. It questions authority and accountability, asking who watches the watchdogs and how much freedom we're willing to sacrifice for security. The MCU also explores family, both biological and chosen. The Guardians become a dysfunctional family. The Avengers are colleagues who become comrades, who become friends, who become something more. Thor loses his family and finds a new one. These themes of found family resonate powerfully with audiences who understand that the people you choose can matter as much as the people you're born to. Perhaps most importantly, the MCU has consistently shown that flawed people can still be heroes. Tony Stark is arrogant and self-destructive. Steve Rogers is stubborn and sometimes self-righteous. Thor is initially titled and immature. Natasha Romanoff has read in her ledger. Bruce Banner struggles with anger and self-loathing. Yet these flawed individuals choose to do better, to be better, to fight for something larger than themselves. It's a message audiences desperately need: you don't have to be perfect to be heroic. The MCU has faced challenges too. After Endgame's spectacular conclusion, the franchise has struggled somewhat to recapture that magic. Some Phase 4 and 5 films have underperformed critically and commercially. Audiences have debated whether the MCU is experiencing fatigue, whether the quality has declined, whether the interconnectedness has become overwhelming rather than exciting. These challenges are real, but they're also natural for a franchise that has been running for over 15 years. The MCU's continued evolution, introducing new characters, exploring new genres, taking creative risks, shows that Feige and his team understand that complacency is death for franchises. They must keep innovating, keep surprising audiences, keep earning their loyalty film by film. What Kevin Feige accomplished with the Marvel Cinematic Universe is unprecedented in cinema history. He took characters nobody cared about, assembled a team of talented filmmakers, and created the most successful franchise of all time. He proved that comic books deserved serious treatment, that interconnected storytelling could work on an unprecedented scale, that audiences would commit to long-form narratives if given compelling reasons to care. From a risky $525 million loan that could have bankrupted Marvel Studios to a multi-billion-dollar empire spanning films, television, and theme parks, the MCU represents the ultimate franchise success story. It showed that with vision, planning, respect for source material, and a commitment to quality storytelling, even the most improbable dreams can become reality. The young man who was rejected from film school 5 times became the most successful producer in history. The washed-up actor Hollywood considered unemployable became the face of the biggest franchise ever. the B-list characters nobody cared about became the most beloved heroes in the world. Against all odds, Kevin Feige and Marvel Studios made it work. Tony Stark said he was Iron Man, and the world believed him. Steve Rogers proved that a scrawny kid from Brooklyn could be the first Avenger. A ragtag group of outlaws became the Guardians of the Galaxy. A king protected his nation and inspired a movement. And through it all, Kevin Feige proved that if you have a bold enough vision and the courage to execute it, you can create something that transcends entertainment and becomes part of our cultural fabric. The MCU taught us that heroes can come from anywhere. That redemption is possible. That sacrifice matters. That diversity is strength. That family is who you fight beside. That hope endures even in our darkest hours. And that sometimes, the most extraordinary thing about extraordinary people is their humanity. 11 years, 23 films, one unprecedented saga. The Infinity Saga proved what franchises could accomplish when conceived as a unified vision from the beginning. And it all started with one sentence uttered by a man in an iron suit: "I am Iron Man." The world had been waiting for heroes. Kevin Feige and Marvel Studios assembled them. And in the process, they assembled something else, the most ambitious, successful, and influential franchise in cinema history. Chapter 7. The Ripple Effect, Cultural Impact and Legacy. In the grand narrative of modern cinema, the 5 franchises explored in this book did far more than entertain audiences. They fundamentally transformed the global film industry, redefined what a movie could be, and became cultural phenomena that bridged generations, geographies, and industries. The ripple effects of Star Wars, Harry Potter, The Lord of the Rings, James Bond, and the Marvel Cinematic Universe reach beyond box office success. Their influence is felt in economics, fan culture, creative practice, technology, and even in the social and moral conversations that shape our world. The first wave of impact is economic. While each of these franchises generated billions at the box office, the true revolution occurred in how they built interconnected financial ecosystems around their stories. Film studios no longer measured success by ticket sales alone. They learned to see each film as the core of a multifaceted enterprise spanning merchandise, home entertainment, streaming, gaming, tourism, and live experiences. When Star Wars proved that toys could become a multi-billion-dollar revenue stream, it shifted Hollywood's priorities permanently. Decades later, the MCU and Wizarding World would refine this model into a continuous pipeline of products and experiences, where every release reignited consumer engagement and generated demand across media platforms. This strategy extended far beyond retail shelves. Theme parks became the physical embodiment of cinematic universes, turning passive spectators into active participants. The expansion of franchises into themed attractions such as Star Wars, Galaxy's Edge, or the Wizarding World of Harry Potter demonstrated the power of immersive storytelling to drive tourism, employment, and regional economies. Theme park attendance has surged in recent years as families plan vacations around these destinations, transforming fictional worlds into physical spaces of belonging. The upcoming expansions of major parks, including entirely new lands based on iconic franchises, illustrate that storytelling has evolved into an experiential economy. The visitor isn't just watching the film, they are stepping into it. Conventions and fan gatherings have become another powerful extension of this ripple effect. What began as small, niche meetups for devoted enthusiasts has evolved into globally recognized events that generate hundreds of millions in economic activity. San Diego Comic-Con, for example, has become a cornerstone of the entertainment industry calendar, serving both as a major marketing stage for studios and as a cultural festival that celebrates community, creativity, and fandom. The success of these conventions mirrors a broader shift. Audiences are no longer satisfied with consuming stories, they want to live within them. Fans now form lasting social networks that transcend geography, bonded by shared values, creativity, and emotional connection to the worlds they love. Fandom itself has become an influential cultural and economic force. Communities formed around these franchises operate like ecosystems of creativity, producing art, fiction, podcasts, and commentary that extend the life and meaning of the stories. The 501st Legion, a global Star Wars costuming group, has raised millions for charitable causes while visiting children's hospitals and schools in character, proving that entertainment can translate directly into social good. Similarly, activist groups born from the Harry Potter fandom have channeled the series' moral lessons about justice and equality into real-world campaigns promoting literacy, human rights, and inclusion. These movements demonstrate that modern fandom can evolve into civic engagement, fiction-inspiring action. Beyond community building, franchise filmmaking has permanently altered the creative logic of Hollywood. Before the 1970s, studios typically produced standalone films with limited continuity. The success of Star Wars and Bond changed that paradigm, introducing serialized storytelling to cinema. The Marvel model then perfected it, interconnected narratives designed years in advance, with each installment functioning as both a self-contained story and a chapter in a much larger epic. This strategy created a sense of anticipation and interdependency among audiences, where missing one film felt like missing a crucial episode of a collective cultural experience. Competing studios soon followed suit, leading to what is now known as cinematic universe thinking. While this approach has yielded enormous financial rewards, it also reshaped artistic practice and audience psychology. Filmmaking became an exercise in long-term world-building and cross-platform coordination. Writers, directors, and producers needed to consider not only immediate plot lines but also how characters and events would ripple across future films, television series, and even video games. The result was an industrial shift in how creative labor is structured and how intellectual property is managed. Every successful franchise is now a carefully planned ecosystem, balancing creative continuity with commercial strategy. The ripple effect also extends into the global economy and international relations. Major franchises have become cultural exports that shape perceptions of the nations that produce them. The Lord of the Rings turned New Zealand into a pilgrimage site for global fans, dramatically boosting tourism and rebranding the nation as Middle-earth in the popular imagination. Likewise, Harry Potter re-energized British film production, revitalizing studios like Leavesden and inspiring a thriving tourist circuit across the United Kingdom. Meanwhile, Star Wars and Marvel, through Disney's worldwide marketing reach, became vehicles of soft power, embedding American storytelling and values into the global entertainment consciousness. Equally important is how these franchises shaped audience expectations for cinematic quality and spectacle. The visual effects revolution that began with Star Wars in 1977 continues today in the CGI-rich worlds of Marvel and Middle-earth. Advancements in motion capture, digital environments, and sound design have redefined what viewers expect from a blockbuster experience. Each franchise pushed the boundaries of available technology, creating a cycle of innovation that spilled over into other industries like gaming, simulation, and virtual reality. In this way, the ripple effect includes not just cultural influence but also technological progress. However, cultural impact is not measured solely by commercial or technical achievement, it is also reflected in the themes and values these stories champion. Each of these 5 franchises carries a moral dimension that has resonated across decades. Star Wars taught generations about hope, courage, and redemption. Harry Potter offered lessons about friendship, integrity, and standing up against prejudice. The Lord of the Rings reminded audiences that even the smallest person can change the world, and that power must be tempered by humility. James Bond, through constant reinvention, has mirrored changing social norms and global politics, exploring how heroism, morality, and gender dynamics evolve across time. The Marvel Cinematic Universe has extended these ideas into contemporary struggles, exploring trauma, responsibility, and sacrifice in ways that speak to modern audiences navigating complex moral landscapes. These narratives have given rise to academic study and social interpretation. University courses, think pieces, and conferences have analyzed the political allegories, mythological structures, and ethical dilemmas embedded in these films. They are viewed as modern mythologies, stories that reflect society's deepest hopes, fears, and aspirations. Fans and scholars alike interpret the hero's journey not only as an entertainment formula but as a reflection of human psychology and collective storytelling traditions stretching back to ancient epics. Through these myths, contemporary culture negotiates identity, morality, and meaning. At the same time, the growing dominance of franchises has raised critical questions about creative diversity and sustainability. Some observers worry that the emphasis on interconnected universes and guaranteed returns has overshadowed original filmmaking, limiting space for experimentation and independent voices. Franchise fatigue, where audiences tire of formulaic repetition, poses a genuine risk. The challenge for studios now is to balance continuity with innovation, nostalgia with novelty. When done thoughtfully, as in certain recent franchise entries, filmmakers can still use familiar worlds to explore new ideas, technologies, and emotional truths. But the tension between commerce and creativity will remain a defining feature of franchise culture. Social change has also influenced the evolution of these properties. Representation and inclusivity have become central concerns in recent years, with franchises increasingly serving as platforms for diverse voices and heroes. Black Panther was a watershed moment, demonstrating that a film rooted in Black culture and African futurism could achieve global box office dominance while sparking conversations about race, identity, and empowerment. Shang-Chi brought Asian heroes to the mainstream, expanding the scope of what heroism looks like in the cinematic universe. Even James Bond, once defined by a narrow archetype of masculinity, has evolved to engage with more complex portrayals of vulnerability, loss, and emotional depth. These shifts reflect a broader societal demand for authenticity and representation, proving that franchises can both mirror and accelerate cultural progress. Fandom, meanwhile, has proven to be a lasting social force. For many people, these fictional worlds function as modern communities, spaces for belonging, creativity, and shared identity. Online forums, fan fiction archives, cosplay, and social media discussion sustain engagement long after a film leaves theaters. The emotional investment of these communities gives the franchises an almost religious significance, providing moral frameworks, rituals, and collective experiences. They create continuity in a fragmented media landscape and a sense of meaning in an increasingly globalized world. It is through this deep emotional bond between fans and fiction that the ripple effect achieves its most enduring power. The relationship between fans and creators has also become more interactive and participatory. Studios monitor fan feedback, adapt to audience reactions, and often integrate fan expectations into creative decisions. This feedback loop has made fans co-authors of their beloved universes. Social media allows near-instant dialogue between studio executives and global audiences, creating both opportunities and risks. A passionate fanbase can amplify a film's success or mobilize criticism when it feels betrayed by narrative choices. In this sense, fandom has become a new form of democratic engagement within entertainment, with consumers influencing the evolution of the stories they love. The economic and cultural ripples extend into emerging media and technology. Streaming platforms have made franchises omnipresent, turning once occasional events into year-round engagement cycles. Limited series, spin-offs, and prequels now fill the gaps between theatrical releases, ensuring continuous visibility and revenue. Theme parks, merchandising, and digital games further sustain the connection. This perpetual engagement cycle represents the ultimate expression of transmedia storytelling, a narrative that never ends, expanding across formats and generations. Ultimately, the legacy of these 5 franchises lies in how they changed our understanding of what storytelling can achieve. They demonstrated that cinema could become a shared cultural language, capable of inspiring art, scholarship, activism, and innovation. They showed that stories could live across decades, evolving with each new medium and each new audience. The ripple effect continues outward, through technology, commerce, and imagination, reshaping how the world consumes, creates, and connects through narrative. As we stand at the threshold of the next era of film and media, these franchises remain benchmarks against which all others are measured. They prove that myth still matters, that characters and worlds can transcend generations, and that great stories, when told with vision and purpose, can change not only an industry but the cultural fabric itself. The waves they set in motion decades ago are still reaching distant shores, influencing how we watch, dream, and tell stories today. And as we look to the future, it becomes clear that their greatest legacy is not just the worlds they created, but the world they transformed. Chapter 8. The Future of Franchises, What Comes Next? Standing at the crossroads of cinematic history, it is clear that franchise filmmaking has reached both a creative peak and a moment of reckoning. The five titans discussed throughout this book, Star Wars, Harry Potter, The Lord of the Rings, James Bond, and the Marvel Cinematic Universe, have each pushed storytelling, technology, and commerce to extraordinary heights. Yet as the industry looks ahead, it must confront the question of sustainability. Can the franchise model continue to dominate entertainment, or has its success planted the seeds of exhaustion? The next era will depend on how studios balance innovation with legacy, commerce with artistry, and nostalgia with the demand for new voices. The first major challenge is economic sustainability. The franchise model was built on escalating spectacle, larger budgets, more visual effects, higher stakes, and global marketing campaigns measured in hundreds of millions. But as production costs rise, so too does the risk of underperformance. The streaming age has intensified this tension. Platforms once spent freely to accumulate content libraries, but with subscriber growth slowing and investors demanding profitability, the calculus has shifted. The question facing executives today is not how big a film can be, but how sustainable a cinematic universe truly is. A single underwhelming installment can ripple through a company's entire balance sheet, eroding brand confidence and investor trust. Still, franchises remain some of the most dependable financial assets in modern entertainment. Their built-in audiences, global recognition, and cross-media potential make them safer investments than untested intellectual property. What is changing is how studios exploit that reliability. Instead of relying solely on theatrical tentpoles, companies are now building transmedia ecosystems, expanding universes through streaming series, mobile games, podcasts, immersive experiences, and theme park expansions. Each touchpoint extends the life of the story, maintaining audience engagement year-round. This shift marks the evolution from franchise filmmaking to franchise world-building, where the boundaries between film, television, and digital media dissolve into a continuous narrative environment. The streaming revolution has been central to this transformation. Where earlier decades defined success through box office charts, today's metrics are measured in viewing hours, retention rates, and subscription renewals. Disney's integration of the Star Wars and Marvel brands into Disney Plus fundamentally changed the rhythm of storytelling. Instead of waiting years between installments, fans now experience an ongoing flow of interconnected stories, from The Mandalorian to Loki to Andor, that deepen character arcs and sustain brand loyalty. For the Harry Potter franchise, Warner Bros. Discovery's decision to reimagine the saga as a long-form streaming series signals a recognition that the episodic model offers both creative flexibility and commercial endurance. Likewise, Amazon's monumental investment in the Rings of Power represents the industry's broader bet on premium streaming franchises as cultural anchors for their platforms. As the digital environment evolves, so too will the nature of cinematic storytelling. New technologies such as artificial intelligence, extended reality, and interactive design are poised to redefine how audiences engage with franchises. AI can already generate hyperrealistic environments, assist with visual effects, and even predict narrative trends through data analysis. In time, it may help create adaptive storylines that respond to viewer input. Meanwhile, virtual reality and augmented reality experiences are pushing franchises into the realm of participatory storytelling. Imagine walking through Middle-earth, training in a Jedi temple, or solving mysteries alongside wizards, not as passive viewers, but as interactive participants. These innovations promise a future in which franchise storytelling becomes a fully immersive experience, blending cinema, gaming, and social connection into one continuous world. Yet technology alone will not secure the future of franchises. The audience's relationship with storytelling is changing, shaped by broader social, cultural, and ethical dynamics. Younger generations demand authenticity, diversity, and purpose from their entertainment. They expect stories that reflect a wider range of human experiences, and they reward studios that prioritize inclusion both on and off screen. The success of Black Panther, Shang-Chi, and Captain Marvel demonstrated that diversity is not only a moral imperative but also a commercial advantage. As audiences become more global, representation becomes essential to sustaining relevance. Future franchises that ignore this evolution risk alienating their base, while those that embrace it will tap into new markets and deeper emotional resonance. Alongside inclusion, environmental and ethical sustainability will shape the next era of production. The carbon footprint of large-scale filmmaking has become a serious concern, prompting studios to invest in virtual production technology, renewable energy, and sustainable set practices. The Mandalorian pioneered virtual LED-stage environments that dramatically reduce travel and physical set construction, marking a turning point in eco-conscious filmmaking. As climate awareness grows, studios will face increasing pressure to balance spectacle with responsibility. The mythic theme that even the smallest person can make a difference, so central to Tolkien's world, may find new relevance in how the industry rethinks its environmental impact. The creative challenge will be to maintain emotional depth within a system optimized for commercial output. As universes expand, the risk of repetition grows. Many viewers already sense fatigue from formulaic storytelling and predictable sequels. The key to longevity lies in rediscovering the human element, the sense of wonder, vulnerability, and personal growth that made these stories resonate in the first place. Successful franchises of the future will not merely recycle plots, they will reinvent their emotional core. Character-driven storytelling, grounded in universal themes of courage, sacrifice, and hope, will remain timeless. The technological trappings may evolve, but audiences will always respond to sincerity and heart. Another defining trend will be the hybridization of storytelling formats. The next generation of franchises will likely blur the lines between film, television, gaming, and live experience. Studios are already experimenting with cross-platform continuity, where decisions made in a video game might influence narrative threads in a streaming series, or where park attractions feed into cinematic storylines. The result is a participatory model of engagement, stories that unfold across mediums, creating a sense of co-ownership among fans. This approach aligns perfectly with modern audience behavior, where interactivity and personalization drive loyalty. The future franchise will not simply be watched, it will be lived. The commercial foundation of franchises will also continue to evolve through new distribution and monetization models. While theatrical releases remain prestigious cultural events, streaming and on-demand viewing have fragmented attention spans. Some studios may adopt staggered or hybrid release strategies, where films debut simultaneously in cinemas and online, allowing fans to choose how they engage. Others will explore microtransactional storytelling, short-form digital content, collectible NFTs, or limited interactive experiences tied to franchise lore. Though controversial, these approaches represent attempts to adapt to changing consumption habits in a post-cinema era. The challenge will be balancing profitability with artistic integrity and ensuring that audiences do not feel exploited by endless monetization. The role of global markets will also become increasingly central. The international box office now accounts for the majority of franchise revenue, and studios design their narratives with a worldwide audience in mind. Cultural sensitivity and local collaboration will be essential to maintaining success. Future franchises may incorporate more multinational creative teams, diverse locations, and cross-cultural storylines. The next great cinematic universe might emerge not from Hollywood but from emerging markets in Asia, Africa, or Latin America, where new voices are redefining genre conventions. As streaming platforms expand globally, storytelling will become less centralized and more polyphonic, with multiple cultures contributing to the shared mythology of global cinema. Even established franchises will need to adapt. James Bond, arguably the longest-running cinematic brand in history, faces the challenge of staying relevant in a world that has outgrown many of its Cold War tropes. The post-Daniel Craig era offers a rare opportunity for reinvention, perhaps with new creative leadership exploring different dimensions of the character or expanding the universe beyond Bond himself. Similarly, Star Wars and Harry Potter will have to navigate generational transitions, passing the torch to new heroes while honoring legacy. Audiences no longer want static mythologies, they crave evolution. The franchises that survive will be those that continue to reflect the times without losing their identity. Underlying all these developments is a deeper philosophical question: what makes a story timeless? The answer lies not in budgets or visual effects but in the emotional truths that resonate across cultures. The great franchises endure because they speak to enduring human desires, the quest for meaning, the struggle between light and darkness, the need for connection and hope. These motifs are universal and infinitely adaptable. As technology changes, the methods of storytelling will evolve, but the essence of myth will remain. Whether told through cinema, holographic projection, or virtual immersion, the stories that survive will be those that illuminate the human condition. The next frontier of franchise storytelling may involve collaborative creativity on an unprecedented scale. Crowdsourced narratives, user-generated content, and AI-assisted world-building could allow fans to shape aspects of the universe themselves. Studios might provide the framework while audiences contribute stories, characters, or designs that become canon through digital platforms. This democratization of storytelling could lead to both innovation and chaos, blurring the line between creator and consumer even further. If handled thoughtfully, it could unleash new waves of imagination and engagement, keeping franchises alive through collective participation rather than top-down control. Despite these opportunities, the industry must also confront the risk of oversaturation. The sheer volume of content has made it difficult for even the most dedicated fans to keep up with every installment or spin-off. To maintain cultural impact, future franchises may need to focus on quality rather than quantity, delivering fewer but more meaningful stories. In doing so, they can recapture the sense of anticipation that once made franchise releases global events. Innovation may also mean scaling down rather than expanding outward, returning to intimate storytelling within vast universes, rediscovering personal stakes within cosmic battles. The final measure of a franchise's future will not be financial, technological, or even creative, it will be emotional. The enduring power of these stories lies in their ability to unite people across borders, generations, and beliefs. When audiences cheer for heroes, mourn losses, or find strength in fictional struggles, they participate in something profoundly human. That emotional connection is the real currency of cinema. As the entertainment landscape fragments into countless platforms and formats, the franchises that thrive will be those that maintain that bond, the shared heartbeat between storyteller and audience. In the end, the future of franchises is neither purely optimistic nor pessimistic, it is evolutionary. The giants of today will continue to adapt, while new mythologies will emerge from unexpected places. Some may fade, others will transform, but the impulse behind them, the human need to gather around stories that reflect our dreams and fears, will never disappear. Just as ancient epics once defined civilizations, cinematic universes now serve as the mythic framework of the modern world. Their evolution will mirror our own, dynamic, uncertain, but driven by an unending desire to make sense of who we are through the stories we share. The age of franchises is far from over. It is simply entering its next chapter, one where technology, diversity, and imagination converge to redefine what storytelling can be. Whether through the glow of a theater screen, the immersion of virtual reality, or the infinite scroll of a streaming service, audiences will continue to seek the same timeless experience, the thrill of wonder, the comfort of familiarity, and the inspiration to believe that even in a vast universe, individual stories still matter. That belief, above all, is what will carry the legends of the silver screen into the future. Cinema, at its core, has always been an act of wonder, light projected onto a screen, transforming shadows into meaning. Over the past half-century, that act of wonder evolved into something larger than anyone could have predicted. What began as singular films, self-contained stories meant to delight for 2 brief hours, became sprawling worlds that crossed generations, media, and continents. Star Wars, Harry Potter, The Lord of the Rings, James Bond, and the Marvel Cinematic Universe are not merely movie franchises, they are modern mythologies, vessels for collective imagination in an era that needed new legends. Their journeys, while distinct, share a common truth: they showed us that stories could expand infinitely without losing their heart. When Luke Skywalker stared at the twin suns of Tatooine, we saw ourselves, restless dreamers longing for destiny. When Harry Potter stepped onto platform 9 3/4, we felt the same mix of fear and hope that comes with leaving childhood behind. When Frodo carried the ring toward Mount Doom, it was every person's struggle against temptation and despair. When James Bond faced the end of his illusions in a world that had outgrown his archetype, we confronted the reinvention of masculinity and heroism itself. And when the Avengers stood together to face impossible odds, we were reminded that unity, courage, and sacrifice remain humanity's greatest strengths. These moments transcend the boundaries of cinema. They enter the lexicon of culture, shaping how we talk about morality, friendship, loss, and redemption. They inspire art, scholarship, activism, and memory. Children grow up quoting lines their parents once whispered in darkened theaters. Filmmakers reference shots that inspired them to pick up a camera. Each generation rediscovers these stories anew, interpreting them through its own values and struggles. That continuity, the ability of a single story to evolve with its audience, is what makes a franchise timeless. But the power of these legends lies not only in their longevity, but in their humanity. Behind the spectacle and marketing lies a simple truth: people are drawn to stories that help them understand themselves. The universes we build on screens are mirrors for our fears and aspirations. They give form to our questions about power, destiny, love, and loss. They teach us to see the hero within the ordinary, to believe in transformation, and to recognize that the battle between good and evil often begins within the self. That is why, even as technology advances and formats change, the emotional core of these franchises continues to resonate. The cinematic universes of the 21st century have become our shared mythology, not because they are flawless, but because they are familiar. They accompany us through childhood and adulthood alike, offering comfort, excitement, and moral reflection. Like the great myths of ancient civilizations, they adapt to each era's concerns. Where Greek epics once asked what it meant to defy the gods, modern franchises ask what it means to defy the systems, institutions, or internal demons that shape our world. In both cases, storytelling becomes a tool for survival, a way to make sense of chaos and to reaffirm that, despite uncertainty, meaning endures. As this book has shown, the ripple effects of these franchises stretch far beyond entertainment. They transformed economies, industries, and even cities. They redefined intellectual property as a living ecosystem. They taught Hollywood to think in decades, not weekends. They created communities of fans who turned passion into purpose, from charity work to social activism. They influenced technology, pushing the limits of what was possible on screen, and in doing so, altered how we experience art itself. But their greatest achievement is intangible. They reminded us that imagination is not an escape from reality, it is a way of engaging with it. In an age when attention is fragmented and cynicism often replaces wonder, the endurance of these stories proves something essential about human nature. We still crave meaning. We still believe in heroes. We still want to be moved by something larger than ourselves. And though the form of cinema will continue to evolve, perhaps into interactive worlds, immersive experiences, or new digital frontiers, the desire to gather around a shared story remains timeless. The audience may hold a controller instead of a ticket, but the yearning to connect through narrative will never fade. The future of franchise storytelling will no doubt be shaped by new technologies, new cultures, and new storytellers. Yet the foundation laid by these five giants will continue to guide the industry's imagination. They have shown that art and commerce, myth and machinery, can coexist if balanced with care. Their legacy is not merely cinematic but cultural, reminding us that even in an era of algorithms and data, creativity still begins with emotion. Behind every billion-dollar brand lies a human heartbeat, a writer's dream, a director's vision, an actor's vulnerability, and an audience's belief. Ultimately, the legends of the silver screen endure because they give us permission to believe again. They remind us that good can rise after darkness, that redemption is possible, and that unity can overcome despair. They teach us that imagination, when shared, becomes a form of hope. Long after the final credits roll, their light lingers, in conversations, in creativity, in the quiet inspiration that moves us to tell stories of our own. Every generation inherits its myths, ours just happens to be told through galaxies far away, enchanted castles, secret agencies, and universes that assemble against impossible odds. And perhaps that is the most extraordinary part. These stories will outlive their creators, their studios, and even their technologies. They will continue to evolve, reshaped by new voices who find within them the same spark that once drew audiences into theaters decades ago. Someday, a young filmmaker will watch these films and feel what George Lucas once felt after seeing Flash Gordon, what Peter Jackson felt reading The Hobbit, or what Kevin Feige felt envisioning heroes united on one screen, that instinct to imagine something greater, to tell a story that outlasts its time. In the end, the silver screen is not just a window to fantasy. It is a mirror reflecting who we are, and a lantern illuminating who we might become. These five franchises have shown us that legends are not born in myth, they are forged in the hearts of those who dare to dream them. And as long as there are dreamers, cinema will never run out of stories worth telling.